So, how's it going, dude? Last time we did
Busy,
this,
bro.
yeah, last time we did this, you were at Fort Sill still. I think you
Yep.
had plans to go to Fort Bragg after that, or you were hoping to go to Fort Bragg after that, or something like that.
I am at Fort Bragg. I've been here for about a year now.
Fort Braggistan, man.
It's a thing.
I'll tell you what, man. I've been to a few army bases, and Fort Sill, Fort Bragg. The outside of those bases are the worst that I've seen in the
Yeah.
military. Like, some of the people complain about the outside of Camp Pendleton, which is crazy that they do, or Camp Lejeune, and how the town itself isn't as nice or whatever.
Yeah.
But Lawton, Oklahoma, and Fayetteville have got to be two of the crummier places. I don't know, unless it's gotten nicer. I haven't been out to Fayetteville
I
in
know.
probably
It,
almost 10 years.
it's still Vietnam.
Yeah,
So it's a thing still, man. Yeah. Um it's very much, you can tell they're dependent upon the military for their economy, and if they didn't have it, that was it.
yeah. It's funny how the ridiculous stuff, like in Jacksonville, where Camp Lejeune is,
Yep.
the strip club. What was it called? Oh, I can't believe I'm forgetting it right now. It was called the Dirt something. We called it the Dirt, or I don't even remember.
All of your Marine friends are super depressed now.
Yeah, they're like this guy, Dirtwood. It was the Driftwood, and then it
Oh, okay.
got changed, or we called it Dirtwood. But I think someone either bought it and tore it down, or they changed the name of it, and it was like literally Marines and all these pages and Facebook and all these like groups and stuff were like, no, not the Dirtwood. I can't believe
Of
they're
course, it was
doing it.
Marines.
Of course, is there
Yeah.
like the same kind of establishments in at Fort Bragg?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I don't, dude. I got here end of August 2020,
Mm.
and dude, I was TDY like 2 weeks later.
That's the
I
way
mean,
they
like,
go, though.
yeah, dude. I still, to this day. I mean, I'm probably gone 2 to 3 weeks a month.
So
Like,
are you still doing JTAC stuff, or did you move
yep.
into a traditional fires role? Okay.
No. I've been JTACing. That's all I've been doing. So
So how does that work? Because I think we talked about it last time, and there may have been changes in the program. It's been a while. You were like episode 30 something. I think. I think it might have been
yeah,
pre-video or one of the first video ones.
I think it was a video, one of the first video ones. Because I think I was using the crappy internet in my building that the dude had.
Yeah, you were on base.
Um,
Yeah.
yep. So
So before you said that, like, to Army enlisted like JTACs normally only reside in SOCOM and stuff like that. You were
yep.
an exception because at Fort Sill you somehow finagled a TACP seat and you fell under one of
Yep.
the Air Force commands. That's how you got to maintain it, right?
Yeah. So it's still, it was very much like a memorandum of agreement to facilitate joint fires training. Fell under, right, 6 ETS Detachment 1, which is the detachment that's at Fort Sill. But now, I mean, I fall under, SOCOM's program. So, specifically on the use of SOC side. So,
That's what you wanted, right? Did you leverage your
oh yeah.
JTAC position to get into that spot?
So I leveraged just my, really my reputation. So I got offered a job, by a buddy, and was like, I'll do it. Let's go. And that was kind of where we were at. I think the last time we talked, we were just I was kind of getting through the Army assignment system, just trying to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that everything was, because I wasn't airborne, so I had to get an acceptance memo because I wasn't airborne qualified. Um, and all the COVID things were going on, and so and I wasn't at my PCS moment yet for my assignment. So the Army says 36 months is what they want at a duty station, and I was at
Mm-hmm.
like 32 months, I think, when I finally left.
Hmm.
And so like I had to leverage some things, but showed up, man, and I hit the ground just sprinting.
That's what you
So,
want, though, man.
because so I showed up. I had to do a full mission profile. Well, technically, I had to do two full mission profiles. I did an eval, which didn't count because I was read in a control that isn't an Air Force requirement, but it's a SOCOM requirement.
Hmm.
And since I was coming over as a CT-JTAC, technically I had to have those controls. So did an eval, didn't count, so I had to do another eval. So in the span of like 2 weeks, dude, I think I did. I probably spent about 15 hours controlling live air.
Nice.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it was
stressful.
Oh yeah, it
Because you're
was.
being
So
evaluated. Yeah.
So it was Moody Air Force Base, right? So I did my day. This is like I showed up to the unit, like met all the fires dudes, fist bumps, all that stuff, and met my battalion commander, my battalion sergeant major, and was like, all right, cool, I'm leaving, going to going to qualify. And they're like, we got a validation going on, like we kind of need you here. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not JTAC yet, so I need to go do that.
Yeah, for sure.
So showed up, right, went and did that, and I mean, Moody Air Force Base, September of last year, so super humid. And it was also during hurricane season. So like, and I was down there when a hurricane was hitting Florida. All right. And right, Moody's right on that border, just southern Georgia. And so we were out there day one, I do my FMP without any problems, go into my 24-hour planning phase, for my eval, and we're out eating dinner or something like that the night before my eval, and my evaluator and I are having a beer, and I was like, dude, there's no way that they're flying. Like, a hurricane is hitting Georgia tonight. Like, there's absolutely no way. A-10 pilot texts me at like 5 a.m. He's like, we're on our way.
We're ready.
I was like, what? By the end of that eval, I had done 26 9 lines.
Oh, nice.
Because there's a cloud deck, right, down to 100 feet. So it's just ripping BOCs, ripping BOCs. And to get an eval off, you have to do a BOT.
You want to explain what those are for people that don't know?
All right, so bomb on coordinate. So, and it's kind of funny when you talk to guys about this, right? So bomb on coordinate, the weapon is going to a coordinate, right? Bomb on target, the weapon is going to a target. People will be like, oh, it's the same thing. But it's not, right? The coordinate doesn't move or change. The target can move, from the coordinate that was provided. So I ripped 26 bomb on coordinates. And the pilot, like, I think TOT was the on station time was like 8:30 local, 8:30 to 10 o'clock was my two A-10s, and then there were two A-10s that were just flying around that showed up. Out of, like, right at my guys checked off, and these guys were like, hey, we heard you're doing CAS, we want to do CAS. And I was like, all right, whatever. So I had them for an hour and a half. My guys came back, and then so I mean, in one day I had like 5 hours of straight just controlling, and finally the last like 15 minutes of this vol, the clouds broke, the A-10 could get down to 500 feet, and he's like, we're doing a type 1, we're doing a BOT, let's go. So eval complete, like, finally, after like 7 hours total of being out in the out in the range area.
That's good stuff, though, man. That's always cool when another section shows up and you're like, yeah, fuck yeah, we'll take you.
And it was interesting, right? Because no products, right? Like, he had no products. He had no idea what was going on. And he kind of got a battle handover, but really didn't get a battle handover because he was just like flying around. And my dude leaving was like, hey man, if you're bored, because I see you flying in circles, there's JTACs. Right. So this dude just showed up, and it was very much like, all right, well, we're doing this. Like, you have nothing.
That's real world, man. That could be real world.
Oh yeah. Well, you talk XCAS, GCAS. I mean, you talk any of the alert, the alert, close air supports. I mean, that's exactly what would happen. Or if you do like a time sensitive target.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
were you did you have any kind of hesitation or kind of nerves, like leaving an academic environment to go where you're at now? I don't know what unit you're at, but
no, I was stoked. Honestly, man. Being in the academic world, being an instructor, like I have always enjoyed developing and teaching and growing individuals, units and that sort of stuff. And I feel like I really thrived over at Fort Sill doing that. My amount of reach was insane out there. And here, there's 58 JTACs in our program. I'm responsible for, I think I have 16 now directly under me. And so, so my reach is smaller, but like the impact, you start talking the actual joint community, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when we deploy, like our staff elements are joint. I mean, we're getting Marines, we're getting Navy, we're getting Air Force, so we're doing this at O5 command levels, and we're building like a joint staff that you would get at a division level.
Yeah. Nice.
So it's really interesting, the dynamic, but um, I just kind of hit the ground like I do. I just go, and I just prove that my reputation means something. I prove that I'm good at what I do. Um, you just kind of learn, right? There was a huge learning curve going from conventional thinking, building products, building scenarios for conventional, going
Mm-hmm.
to special operations.
Yeah.
Right, because you're not talking a battalion worth of armor. You're talking like maybe 36 dudes.
Yeah.
Like going in and owning this battle space, and you're like, all right, well,
Much
you don't
different
got tanks.
missions. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. So, so it's definitely really different. But I mean, I've been over here now for a year. I'm a JTAC instructor now, so I went and got upgraded this past summer to JTAC instructor. So, and I'll get my evaluator upgrade in August of 22.
What's what's like the highest level for you guys? Because in the Marines, it
It's
was IE, instructor, evaluator, and then weapons and tactics instructor, a WTI.
so for us, we stop basically at the evaluator. So you'll go in, like the highest level you'd have would be like the lead evaluator, right? So you're the stand eval kind
Okay.
of guy. So we can't, as of right now, my understanding is we can't send guys to like the weapons school out at Nellis
Mm-hmm.
like the Air Force can, right? So like you'll get a chief of weapons and tactics in an ASOS. Because it's an actual position, right? That is a legitimate position. For us, that doesn't really exist, from my understanding. I would love to go if I had the opportunity. I think it would be a very interesting course for a JTAC to go to, right?
For sure.
Because you come out of there, man. You come out of there and you're like, all right, why are you using a GBU 38 against that? Did you know XYZ?
Yeah,
So
you have like a PhD in close air support and stuff like that.
Graduate level, you know, it's a graduate level CAS school. I've sat through, I sat through one of the fighter debriefs out at Moody, and it was a guy going through, I want to say he was going up for his, maybe his FAC-A evaluator, kind of like their equivalent of that. Right, and he's a weapons school graduate, and he turned around and he's like, all right, man, you're gonna sit through a weapons school debrief, and I was like, oh my god. And I think like 3.5 hours later, he was like, all right, we're complete. I was like, what happened?
Yeah, for sure. Every little point too, I'm sure, was covered.
Yep. Oh yeah, and I was like, I'm on beer like 8. Like, what is going on right now?
That's the thing I miss about the like JTAC community and any kind of community like that where like real shit's on the line. Like the debriefs are serious, and it's like I'm just gonna tell you what you did wrong, and you just need to accept that. There's no kind of like you don't get that out here in the real world. People don't want to hear what they've done wrong. Like the thick skin nature of like being told by someone that may not, you may outrank too in some cases that you did something wrong or you could do it better or here's some tips. You got to swallow your pride a little bit and sometimes sit there and eat it if you fucked up. It's I love it, man. It was probably one of the great best things is having that meritocracy.
And it's interesting, right? So like, I would say my debriefs are typically about 45 minutes. When I'm the instructor and I'm running like full mission profile, whatever, I'll typically do about a 45-minute debrief of, and I'll break it down, just like they do at the weapons school, right? Like, hey, what were the DLOs? Like, what were we trying to do, right? What are our focal points? Like, what happened? What do we need to talk about? And then we kind of sit there and one of the lines we say is, we're going to pull the string on that, right? And so we'll kind of pose a question, let's say a dude took 25 minutes to get a 9 line off, right? And it was just because he was lost in the sauce. We'll kind of pull the string and be like, all right, well, what caused the delay?
Mm-hmm.
What those kind of things. And we'll just kind of have the JTAC be the one that breaks it down. We'll have them be the ones that start identifying like, oh, maybe that's actually what it was.
Yeah.
Right. Cause some guys will instantly go, oh, I'm not experienced. And it's like, cool, yeah, sure. But like, is that really what happened?
Yeah, for sure.
So, because as an instructor for us, like we really slide in the instructor role when guys are just coming out of MQT, right? Like, or out of school, and they slide into that mission qualification training phase. That's when we really slide as an instructors, and we're like, all right, you've learned the science, right? Now let's do the art. Like, how do you use JTAC? And that's kind of where we, us as instructors, like we turn around and we're like, all right, you're going to become eval ready. We've got so long to do it. We've got to achieve so many things. And then once that occurs, they pass that eval. We kind of take a step back for a minute. And we're like, look, man, you're a real JTAC. Your name's on the CDL. Like, congratulations. And then they come and do an FMP, and they're like, what just happened? We're like, welcome to actually being a JTAC.
Yeah.
So you've got six different aircraft flying in the sky right now. You're going to be doing a high shooter. Like, figure it out.
Yeah.
There is none of this. Like, there is no more. Here's a little bit of a nudge. Here's a little bit of a, are you sure? We're just going to sit back, play your ground commander, and be like, all right, cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is terrifying when you're doing that on a live range with live ordnance. You're just like, oh, was that good?
Time.
Was it good? Yeah, it's real interesting. But we've been doing some, technology advances, obviously, different radios, different capabilities. So that's been making the JTAC community a little bit different too. When you start getting into like some of the new ways we're doing CAS and trying to expedite things and stuff like that, it's interesting, but it's just that next hurdle that, like, all right, I have to take a dude that just came to school, and now I got to teach him all this extra crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know digital CAS was becoming like a big thing before I got out.
Yep.
And it's obviously not, that train's not going to stop at all. Is that what you're seeing? Is a lot more like having to do, it's for people that don't know. For people that don't know what we're talking about, like, there's ways to do it where you're sending information directly to the pilot or directly to the cannon if you're using artillery and stuff like that. Yep. And to know all this stuff, or to be capable, not only do you have to be like a good observer, like, okay, I got to get my good target location, I gotta know where I'm at, I gotta know like all this different, I gotta know the capabilities of my different fire support assets and what they can do and stuff. But then now you gotta, now I need to know how to do networking. I have to become almost like an IT kid. What's my freaking IP address? What's your, what kind of ping am I getting here?
Aircraft's IP address.
Yeah. What, are we on the right network? And so now you get an introduction, like a quick introduction into like basic networking and trying to, because there's no one out there. Like once you've learned it, if you're a JTAC, you're usually the EJTAC. There's not a whole group of you normally. So if something fucks up on your tablet or whatever you're working with, radio, it's going to be on you. Yeah.
And the first person that gets screamed at, right, like for technology things, is like the dude that is the one that's always seen using it. Like,
for sure.
It's always like, oh, can you teach me this? Can you teach me that? Like, hey, this isn't working. It's like, cool, man, but like there's a person that's their job.
Yeah.
Like, so digitally aided CAS is definitely a thing. Right. Obviously can't get too into specifics on it.
Yeah.
But like, it's a thing, and it's growing exponentially, right? Like when in the Marine Corps, they're doing one form of DA-CAS, and like in the Air Force, SOCOM, like our side, we're doing another form.
Why though?
Right.
We talked about this before.
It's just capabilities, right? And so like you start getting down to the dollars and cents. You know what I mean? Like, and as well as the capability, you start getting into capabilities of airframes. You start getting into capabilities of services.
Yeah.
So the Navy and the Marines do it because they fall under the Department of the Navy. But those are the aviation assets. You won't always see the capability down on the ground.
Yeah.
And our capability, just started showing up to us like a year ago, but it's been a thing for like 5 years. Like, it's like, what are we doing right now? But like, there's still a whole bunch of questions of like, well, how does this plug in? Where does this fit in? Like, what do I? So if I'm in X location and X network doesn't exist, what am I supposed to do? Right. So there's those ass pains where we're like, all right, question. Here's a request for information. What are we doing?
Yeah.
So like those are part of the reasons why you don't see a lot of people doing digitally aided anything, right? Because that's even the same for like cannon artillery.
Mm-hmm.
You got a forward observer forward on an OP who's running some sort of digital system. He lasers a target with his target locator module, right? That sends the grid back to his little tablet, whatever it is, and he broadcasts the message. But like, how far is he from the gun line?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a relay point in between him and that gun line? Like, there's all those questions of like, all right, what if his battery dies?
Yeah, for sure.
So there's all these things, and in reality, like nothing will ever beat, hey man, could you do this for me? Here's where I need it. Like nothing will ever beat the voice comms. And some guys with digitally aided, like they still don't like it that much because there's still voice comms involved.
Yeah.
Right. But there have to be. There are checks that you can't avoid. There are things you can't avoid. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Right. Like where I think it's going to go. And with capabilities, I'm kind of a nerd, right? I joke about it all the time at work. They'll call me nerds at work. They're like, you're just that guy. Like, cause I'll get into networking, some of these digital systems I'll get into networking on, and they're like, we don't care. Does it turn on and just talk right away? And then no, you got to do this. And they're like, all right, cool. That's too much. I don't want to do it.
Nobody wants to hear that.
So yeah, dude, it's nuts, man. Like, I mean, it's absolutely nuts. That's the stuff and things you have to go through. So,
the argument is for a lot of people, like if I'm getting digital comm, that means I can get voice comm. So why not just use voice comm and make sure there's no kind of issues?
Sometimes it's you might get a little further with voice than you do with digital. And some of that comes down to like antenna placements,
for sure.
Right? Like I'm sure you've seen it, the FTC vehicles that are rolling around with like 4 antennas sticking up that are all within like 3 feet of each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they just probably lost like 30% of their comms capabilities.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much electromagnetic interference in that small little bubble now. Where if that FDC is doing that, you should probably just only have 1 or maybe 2 radios on, and it should be the ones that are the furthest antennas apart.
Mm-hmm.
But like some of the digital systems we're getting into and some of the new radios we're getting into, I mean, dude, you're talking, you can talk, 100 miles.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, so, which is nuts.
Yeah, we used to use this thing in Afghanistan, and it's a open source. It's a public thing. It was called what the fuck? It was like a little satellite push-to-talk radio. Netted Iridium radios.
Yep.
And that's what I did. My very first, the second call for fire I did was with that in Afghanistan with HIMARS because my digital comm went down. Oh shit, my battery's about to die. Give me just 1 second. I did not plug in my power cable, people. Not prepared. There we go. Okay, now I'm good. Jeez, that would have sucked. Yeah, man, and we used to use that, and that thing was awesome. I mean, there was obviously drawbacks to it. I don't know what they do with them now, if they even use them, but that was the only time I ever saw them.
We've got Iridiums, so like that's part of the PACE plan.
Yeah.
So I think I'm signed for 5 of them, something like that.
It's an interesting little radio.
Yeah, it is. And it's just one of those things that like you don't want to tie down, whatever echelon of radio frequencies you're using. Hey, call me on the Iridium, right? Because it's a phone. You can just call a phone.
No. I'm not talking about the Iridium phone. I'm talking about an actual like push to talk. We called it. I don't know if that's the actual name, but it was called the netted Iridium, and it was a little green.
Ours are like sat phones.
Yeah, no. This was about the size of your hand, maybe a little bit smaller. And it was my backup radio. So I had, in Afghanistan, HIMARS and stuff was all digital. We would send like a chat, call for fire, all that shit.
Yep.
And we had this netted Iridium radio plugged up to an antenna that was outside. And we would do a radio check once a day with like, I was in Marja, so I would do one with Leatherneck and then one with Dwyer. Because I think Dwyer had the approval authority and Leatherneck had the actual firing battery, the actual HIMARS launcher. So one time I'm sitting here doing something and someone's like, hey, is that an IED in place there? And I'm like, what? And I like turn and look. And dude, I honestly think this was my very first call for fire ever, like live call for fire. And I remember turning and looking at the satellite or the Predator feed or whatever, and going, "Oh shit, there's some ID implicit or whatever." And I look back at my computer, and my network crashes. Like all the Merc chat, all that shit goes down. I'm like, "Oh fuck." So I grabbed that net of Iridium. I'm like, this is me. Fire for effect, grit. Start doing that with the HIMARS and got it off. And I'm like, man, this thing's fucking cool. Like, this little radio is cool. I actually started taking it as like a backup on a couple of the missions I went on out there.
And why not?
Yeah, I mean, use what works, man. That's, I don't know. That's the kind of stuff I do miss about not being in, like not... being on the outside, looking in, wondering what's actually going on, like what kind of gear people are working with and stuff.
Well, I'd say that's probably one of the downsides to the military, right? Is like we sit here and like everything that's new and shiny, we're just like, and here's an article about it.
Oh yeah.
What are we doing? Like, stop. It's interesting being on this side, right? And then like seeing, and like talking to people that are out, right, and also have like no clue about it because they've never been in, and they'll ask me a question, and it's like I wouldn't know the answer to that. Like I don't know why. Like they'd be like, oh, this new destroyer, like blah blah blah. I'm like, what? Why would I know the answer to that? Like
you don't know all the secrets?
Yeah, I'm like, what are you? And my grandpa's terrible about it, right? My grandpa's, retired Air Force, spent 28 years in, former maintainer, did a whole bunch of, he was in during the Cold War and, all that stuff. So, you can kind of put two and two together with what his job probably entailed, in that time and space. And he'll be like, oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, Grandpa, you already know that, like, we can't talk about that. And he'd be like, yeah, but I read it in, Air Force Times or whatever. I'm like, yeah, great. And it's interesting, reading those articles and then being in and being like, dude, we don't even get told these things. like it's just this article and it's like, oh, apparently we're getting a new radio, guys. Like if anyone didn't know.
I feel like we overclassified stuff while I was in. It makes there's a almost an environment of where you don't want to talk about stuff. Some things, I guess, but I don't know. Some stuff, it's like, what does it matter? Do we really think the Chinese doesn't know that we have this, or the Russians don't know that this is something that,
or that Google doesn't know it? Like,
yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we end up using comes from open source at some point. It comes from like a civilian type. So it's like a lot of this stuff that gets used is already out there on the market in some form or another. So
well, I mean, you watch like some of the new TV shows that are military based, or military, influenced shows, and they're running around with, showing images of like the same night vision that we're running, the newest radios that we're running, and it's interesting that, and I think some of the hesitancy on the military side, right, is like, right, you can go real quick from like what you're allowed to talk about to what you're not allowed to talk about.
Oh,
like that transition can happen extremely fast.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what some of the hesitancy is for people, is, like you'll start going and talking, kind of forgetting your audience, and then you'll all of a sudden be like, oh crap, bring that back. Because I've caught myself, teaching classes, who are not in a secure environment, and then I'll be like, all right, we got to stop here because we can't go any further.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's probably part of it. I remember this last deployment I was just on, that was one of the conversations we had, was like, hey, stop marking things with this classification if it's not that classification.
Yeah, for sure.
Like you're making it more of a pain now, so I definitely agree with you that I do feel like sometimes there's some over classification that occurs. But I think at some point too, that's people just being like, you know what, if I do it, I can't get in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to protect my ass, because then that way, like, if someone else has to make the decision, kind of forgetting that, like, if you're the initial, classifier, you're the person that has to agree to the declassification, basically.
Yeah, it's some ridiculous stuff. It got to the point when I was in where it was like, oh, if you took hand notes on pink paper, doesn't matter what the notes were, like that's classified, like that can't leave the skiff or whatever. Well, and I'm like, yeah, okay.
Well, I'd sit there like, right, and you take notes. I mean, you start getting into the conversation of like coordinates, like what coordinates are classified, what coordinates aren't. You know what I mean? You know, you know, like you would, based off your experience, like you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know which ones are and which ones aren't, and like so you sit there as a JTAC and you're like, um, my entire book is those. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so you know, so it's kind of those interesting things, you know, and anytime you start adding crypto to something, it's like, all right, well, is it actually classified? Because we didn't talk about anything that wasn't. We could have if we wanted to. You know, and that's like, you know, we're running into those hurdles doing JTAC training. You know, going to ranges, and it's like, all right, so I got to have this radio to do this radio to do this, but I have to do this on this one so the range control guy can hear it. And it's like, Jesus, like,
Yeah, it becomes a bureaucratic mess.
yep,
Is
yeah,
exactly what it
and
is.
so you know, I think there's at some point, like, there's definitely the overclassification, but I also think there's sometimes like too much that's shared. You know what I mean? Like, um, I mean, you read some of our manuals, right? Like, it says right on the front page whether or not distribution is allowed, right? Like, what's the distribution level? And like, there's some things that really are TTPs and like SOP, you know, like techniques, or, you know, all that stuff, and standard operating procedures. And it's like, well, why is this on Google? Like, why can I open source pull this up? Like, you wonder why the Taliban at one point knew if they ambushed us, we would react to an ambush and we would close the distance with the enemy. And then they were like, what if we put an ID in between here and there? You know,
Yeah.
and it's because the infantry platoon manuals are on Google, you know, and so I think there's some aspect to like, maybe we should pull back a little bit on what's distributed, and if someone wants to know it, then put in the freedom of information request. You know what I mean? And let the appropriate people determine, is there a legitimate need? You know, and if there is, okay, do we just remove the things that are considered, you know, like for official use only? Right? Don't classify it, but like maybe we just start removing things that we deem for official use.
Yeah.
Because we probably should. People probably shouldn't know, you know, how an infantry platoon would react to an ID. You know, how they would react to an ambush, like open source. Because now our enemy can Google that and be like, oh, okay, so if I blow them up, this is what they're gonna do.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get rid of like manuals getting online and stuff like that, or
No.
getting out there. I don't think that's ever going to go away. But unit tactics for sure, down to like the, you know, what's my squad's SOP, what's my company battalion, like that stuff should definitely not be getting out there. Yeah, it's a fine line, right? Where the taxpayers deserve to know where their tax money's going and how it's being spent, you know, and like what's being done and stuff like that. But at the same time, you don't want to show all your cards. I don't know, man. I think we have so much like cool stuff like that happens that people just don't know about that's not even classified. I don't know. There's just so much. There's always something crazy going on in the military. Not like,
oh yeah,
I don't know how people that on the outside would take that, but I don't know.
I mean, there's a lot of I mean, people probably don't know that, like, you know, like the convoy live fires. You know what I mean? Like tanks going and blasting rounds. You know, downrange. You know, practicing. You know, those kind of things. And you know, people file complaints all the time about noise, and it's like, all right, so do you not want the military to be prepared?
Well,
Like,
people like that, it's like, dude, you live next to a base. What'd you expect?
Dude, Carson, right, is Fort Carson in Colorado was one of the worst.
Yeah.
When it came to that, right? Like, I mean, they'd put out the public affairs statement, like, hey, training's gonna be going on this time to this time, like, you know, period to darkness and blah blah blah. And then at the end of the training, like, you know, the public affairs people are like, yeah, we received like, you know, 80 complaints, and it's like, how long has Fort Carson been here? Like,
For sure.
What do you want? You know, I don't think there's any complaints that come out of Fort Bragg, at least nothing that I'm aware of.
There are always
it's
complaints.
It's just shaking all the time.
Anytime the Marines went there, anytime we went there for Rolling Thunder, which was an exercise we did twice a year, there was always complaints. And I think like last year or the year before when the units went, it was someone was so annoyed out in town, they called the police and said an artillery round had landed in their yard to stop and it stopped all the training until it was investigated. You know, because they thought they had
out there with a shovel.
Yeah, right. They thought someone shot off the base. You know,
which is a feat. I mean, like that's a feat and a half. Like to you're talking charges, you're talking quadrant elevations, like
I've seen people shoot out of the box before. I've never seen them shoot off, off the base though. Yeah.
I have. I mean, I've seen a round go off a base, but but the buffer really wasn't that far. Like I'm not talking like they shot like 10 kilometers.
Yeah.
It was I think it was only like 2 kilometers off the impact area, and it was really just because of laziness. It wasn't anything crazy. No one got hurt, and I think it got caught because like the farm landowner was like, "Well, this hole wasn't here 2 days ago."
Yeah, where was this at? Here, was this in the States?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was in Oklahoma, man. It was at Fort Sill.
Damn, they shot off. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was like right on the buffer of like Fort Sill and like private farmland.
Jeez.
So, I mean, no one got hurt, nothing like that. So,
did you guys have many firing incidents while you were at Fort Sill?
We had rounds out of impact every now and then, or like rounds out of like the safety box, which I always had a hard problem. Which I always had a hard time with the statement of like out of a safety box, because like the whole impact area is deemed safe. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Like you're on a firing point for firing this direction. Did your round land in the impact area? Yes. Then it was safe. Like what are we confused about? And so we had rounds. We had one round I think that was like right on the borderline of out of impact. And then the one that I just talked about, that was end of 2018. I think that one happened. But honestly, I feel like it happens more at like regular units, just because there's so many safety checks at SIL, right? Because like, so you've got the personnel learning to be the gunners and that sort of stuff, but like then you've got an instructor there, another instructor here, and like so there's like 3 checks that are happening, 4 checks that are happening. We're on the gun line. It's like there's a double check. There's not like a quadruple check of things. Like when you start talking to the fire direction center, people learning, like they're doing their thing, they're nerding out, typing away, getting their numbers. But then there's the manual safety check occurring behind them. And then the instructors coming back in and checking the digital safety. And like, so I feel like there's a lot more safety check blocks because it's training.
Yeah, that makes
an
sense.
Actual TRADOC installation, and the people that are doing it aren't certified, right? So like there has to be a certified person verifying the information now, because you could get that one person that's like, azimuth of fire is the 180 degrees the opposite direction.
Yeah, for sure. Fuck, man.
So
it happens.
I mean, the only thing, like the last time we talked about, the guy that strafed the wrong target on the impact area, like, and thankfully it was in a deemed safe zone. I would say that's probably more of where we had our issues was, aircrafts, potentially striking targets that weren't approved for close air support targets.
Yeah.
But I think while I was at Fort Carson, we had like 3 firing incidents in our battalion, in our FA battalion alone. That's good times right there. And then when I went to Devardy, there was like 2 back to back. It was like Jesus. So
it happens, man. It's in the fire support community. It's just one of those things, being the observer on the end of it. You're just hopefully everybody did their job right.
And that's always interesting too, right, man? Like, what the first person that's blamed in a firing incident is the FO, and it's like,
yeah.
Like I got the grid from whatever source. I then plotted it on a map to verify that it was at least in the impact area, and it was. So it wasn't me. It was definitely one of you 2 other people.
Yeah, for sure.
So
it's almost never
every single time.
It's almost never the FO. I remember one time.
Every single time, man.
I remember I was at Bragg one year actually, and we were shooting, and there was a battery that was shooting out a sheaf every time. And for those that don't know, that means their grouping was off. There was always there was always 1 or 2 guns that was like way off on the grouping. And and they thought that we were fucking something up to the point where the battery commander showed up on the OP with his like BC scope, pulls it out and starts doing all his thing. And we're like, dude, it's not us, man. Like, that's you guys.
What are you doing?
They got to verify, I guess, but it's like...
Well, so I had that happen with mortars. And like the right, the gun line NCO came up and he's like, "It's all you, man. You're fucked up." And I was like, "Probably not, but okay, like that's fine. We'll play this game." Right, because I was being very accusatory on the radio for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's only fair that he came up and was like, "Hey, it's you." And I was like, "All right, man. Here's the grid. Do you agree?" And he's like, "Yes." And I was like, "All right, cool. We're going by gun." And so, right, started gun 1, gun 2, gun 3, and then gun 4. And I was like, and we get to gun 4, and I was like, "Watch this." And I was like, "Gun 4, fire." Get shot, get splashed. And I'm like, "So you see where all the other 3 landed, and you see where the 4th one is?"
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
"Tell me how it's me." And then right, and I was like, "Hey, man." And so we kind of talked for a second. I was like, "You know what? Let's try something." And so I called him. I was like, "Hey, you're gonna fire an actual HE round on this." And so we fired the high explosive round, and it hit where it was supposed to. But like the training rounds were going like 600 meters off target.
Don't they have the same
So
ballistics?
so they're supposed to, in theory.
Maybe a bad
But
batch.
he went back. Yeah, he went back and then relayed all the guns, and then that kind of fixed the problem. The training rounds then only ended up being about 200 meters off, so it wasn't like drastic. It met the intent. But I've had an incident where I remember we were on the OP, and a round landed outside of impact at the base of the OP.
Yep.
Right, and so like my guys are on the OP, we're out in the field, and like my guys they're hitting me up about it, and like I'm listening to the radio and I'm kind of trying to figure out what's going on, and all of a sudden I hear so my FOs call up. They're like, "Hey, check fire, round just landed." I think it was like 200 meters away from the OP, right? So the OP is basically like a straight up cliff at Colorado, and the road and everything is right below, and that's where they're at. But straight line distance is about 200 meters. Elevation wise, it was probably about 600 meters, so it really wasn't, so danger close, but nothing crazy. And my guys are like, "Hey, check fire, this, blah blah blah." And then the radar section gets on the radio. I was like, "We've actually got that round landing safe in the impact area. Like,
Fucking radar.
No need to check no need to check fire." And I was like, "What the shit is going on right now?" And so I start driving over there. Run into range control, and the range control's guys like, "Yeah, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, there's legitimately a crater in the road."
Like, I have humans that saw it with their own 2 eyes. I don't care what the computer says.
He's like, 100%. I have a dude standing at the crater right now.
Yeah.
And so I'll never forget. The battalion commander was like, blah, like went off on his tangent saying it was the FOs all messed up and blah blah blah. Those FOs had to go. So I lost an entire team. So we lost an entire team. Like an entire company team, because they had to go redo Fister, because this was the directive of the commander, right?
Really?
And it's like, but they did nothing wrong.
That's
they did actually everything correct. They said check fire the second a safety incident occurred. They said check fire.
Yeah.
And at one point there he was like, 13, the Fisters are not allowed to say check fire unless the radars concur. And I was like, that's actually not true. It's one of the methods of control, so you could fuck off.
Yeah.
But that was also the same guy that like he would berate us for problems that were like not our problem. Like he would get on us. I remember one time he was like, "We got to get back down to the basics." And we're like, when do you want us to get back down to the basics? Because you've whored us out to our maneuver battalions, but you're also whoring us out to all the firing batteries. Like, when the fuck do you want us to get down to the basics?
Mm-hmm.
And comms problems were always the Fisters. It was always the Fisters' fault, right? And mind you, we're probably the best with comms across the Army, with the exception of the commo MOSs. We're probably the best at communications. And so, so this guy would be like, blah, blah, blah. And he'd be like, "I still carry my, my ASIP antenna back from when I was a company FSO." And I was like, "Probably, okay, cool. Like, I've got like 4. Like, what do you?"
Nobody cares, dude.
I've got 2 at my house. What the fuck do you want? A medal? Like, and he would just berate us about stupid things. And it's like, look, dude, look at the training calendar. Like, when do you want, outside of like the current white space where we already have FIST training planned, and that you refuse to give us, and you would just cancel? Like, when the fuck do you want us to train? Like, you want me here till 1900 every night so I can train? Like, is that what you want? Because that's never going to happen.
People don't realize how much training FOs and the teams all do between
nuts.
supporting other people's training, doing their own internal training, just like it's constant field ops.
So you got, sorry, like right? So like as a platoon FO, right, you're going with your platoon. Every training event that is a platoon level event, you're on, right? Platoon live fires, potentially even tied into squad live fires, right? Depending.
Are you talking about when you're with like your maneuver elements?
Yep. Right. So yeah. So like you'll go out. So like for us, right? Anytime platoon and higher training is going on, there's the fisters are there, right? Because if platoon training is going on, the company headquarters is there. So that means the FIST team is out there doing everything they're supposed to be doing, and typically the battalion is out there because the battalion is facilitating those platoon company level exercises, validation, whatever it is. I remember 2014, we spent 9 months straight basically in the field. Like we were coming home. We were like, so you go into mounted gunnery, right? Because I was in an armored unit. So we had to shoot the Bradleys, the tanks and all that sort of stuff. And so, you go into mounted gunnery and then you come out of mounted gunnery and then you're sliding into like some other level exercise. And then you're coming out of that, you're maybe getting a week reset, maybe turning around, going back into the next exercise. And then when your unit's done training, well, now you're doing OPT4, you're now doing blah, blah, blah on top of, well, now we got to get in the MORTEPs, right? So we got to get in the mortar live fire exercises to certify the mortars. We're now doing the howitzer certifications. Well, 13 Foxes have to be there for both, right? It's a requirement for not just range control, but it's a requirement. And so you can't just blindly shoot artillery or mortars. Like it's not a thing. There has to be some sort of observer. And so now we're out doing that stuff. Well, if your FIST team hasn't done FIST cert yet and you're not certified, well, you can't go observe live rounds. So it's like, all right, which FIST teams are certified, which ones aren't? And you start getting into this cycle of like, well, what the fuck is going on? And OPT4 and then you've got JFO in there. You've got all these other things that, it's nuts. Like I think I want to say it's like 26 tasks or some crap like that is what an individual 13 Fox is responsible for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're making it sound like you guys are way more hectic than we are.
Dude, it's nuts.
Yeah.
It's nuts. And I think I have specifically that manual on my computer now because I'm, I pay attention now.
Yeah, for sure. It's tough, man. It's always being in the field, and it's always like it's. It's live fire training, so something can always go wrong. Firing incidents can happen from people being out there overtraining, undertraining. I thought my dog was about to knock my camera over. Jeez, it's one thing after another while I'm here.
My dogs are just unconscious, all spread out my house. So.
I was hoping he would be after he ate and stuff like that, but he's just walking around, bumping into stuff. My camera was shaking a little bit ago, going back and forth. That's what it was for the YouTube people out there watching. My dog was leaning up against it. But, firing incidents, man. My very first field op, my very first time going to the field with 10th Marines, not knowing anything. I was a lap mover, and which means I changed jobs because I was a mechanic beforehand. Yep. We were at OP5 on Camp Lejeune, and I just remember being inside the Fire Support Coordination Center tent, and I hear, over the radio, shot, target number, blah, 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 blah. And it's the check round, which for those that don't know, that's the first round that they shoot to make sure that the round lands in the impact area and everything's safe to continue training.
It's the safety round.
It's the safety round. And I just hear this, shoo, 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 boom. And I'm like, damn. Like, I looked over at my buddy. I was like, man, it's a lot louder out here by the impact area because I'd never, this is my first field op with artillery. He's like, man, that was too loud. And then I hear my gunny outside the tent just like, check fire. And we're like, check fire. Start saying check fire on all the radios. And we're like, where'd it hit? Because we're inside this tent and it's 50 meters from us, dude. A fucking 155 round landed 50 meters from us because they.
And it's a check round.
It was it was supposed to be the round to make sure everything was good, and it was because they put in like half the powder or something like that.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Firing incidents are one of those things. Paul Smith was on, my buddy Paul Smith, who was a weapons and tactics instructor, JTAC. So he was the 1st Marine Division JTAC manager up until when he retired. One of his last field ops as a as a JTAC, they were out in Arizona. I want to say somewhere around the Chocolate Mountains, I think. And he had I can't remember the nomenclature now, but it's the 500-pound concrete bomb, the training bomb. They had one of those.
The BDU 50 or whatever.
Something like that. Yeah, land
Yeah.
but someone opened, one of the captains on the OP, I guess, opened one of the truck doors while the JTAC was on the other side of the hill doing his talk on with the aircraft with an IR pointer. And it got the aircraft turned around, and he saw that flash and thought it was the marker, and it was the internal lights for the truck. And
Jesus
so when
Christ.
he came around, he dropped that bomb, and my buddy Paul he said he was 15 meters from where it hit. He's like, dude, I was sitting there and I just hear this. He said he saw the light from the aircraft go over and was like, man, that doesn't look right. Like, his geometry looks all fucked up. And he was like, oh shit. And he said he got down and it just hit right next to him. And I'm like, that's fucking crazy, dude.
And those, and I mean, and you know, like, you can hear those bombs coming in.
It's a weird noise. Yeah.
Like, it's this weird whistle, like, you know, and then you just hear, and then those concrete bombs, you just hear the like sucking into the ground. Like, it's just this thud of like, and like out in North Carolina, it's just swamp. Like, you start getting out into the bombing ranges, it's just swamp. That's all it is, right? And so you'll hit the ground, you'll hear, I mean, imagine dropping, you know, a bowling ball from, you know, 30 feet up, and then just the sound that like it would make hitting mud. That's what it sounds like. But I mean, obviously it's like, you know, 500 pounds, 2,000 pound concrete bombs, and it's like,
I don't know what it sounds like when you're 20 feet from it, though.
I imagine it's terrifying. I've never been that close. I mean, the closest I've probably ever been to something's about 300 meters. You know, but we use Dare County bombing range for us, Navy right? Dare. So Navy Dare, Air Force Dare, yeah. That's like our go-to ranges. It's kind of what I'd call our home range, quote unquote.
Okay.
Dude, we'll go out there and, like, you know, so the F-15s out of Seymour Johnson in North Carolina, they drop the laser guided 2,000-pound bombs all the time, right? It's like
at Navy Dare
training objectives at Air Force Dare, yeah.
So
okay. So they're concretes, right? So there's no explosives, but like their target is a triple stack Connex, right? So 3 Connexes, but you imagine it's a 3-story building, right? And like you'll see them employ this bomb, right? And I won't go into the tactics of how they do it, but they drop this bomb, and you can see it, right? Whether it's sunny or cloudy, you can see this bomb coming across the sky. It looks like a fucking Volkswagen flying through the fucking sky. And I remember one of the last times we were out there, and, you know, so, you know, I actually want to say it was me controlling, and, right, you know, cleared hot, and bomb goes off. And I would watch it come across the sky, and it smokes through the second and bottom containers, and just molten metal comes spraying out the backside. And I was like, well, that's going to be a problem, because it just goes off into the tree line. It's just like, I was like, well, and and I'm sitting up there, and I'm watching it, and there's just more and more and more and more smoke. Like, crap. Right, because it's and you know, right, just about every military installation is a nature preserve of some sort, right? Yeah. Like, there's some sort of environmental protection, and out there that is legitimately a wildlife refuge, right? Because military installations are probably the best places for wildlife, because we're so aware of, you know, when you start talking about, like, you know, small arms ranges, right? We're so aware of what's in front of our target, beyond our target, and left and right of our targets. You know, we have safeties looking for animals, you know, so we're very aware of the environment. And you start talking about those bombing ranges, animals are smart enough to not go somewhere that there's constant gunfire or explosions, right? Like, so they're smart enough to not do that. And so out of Dare, I mean, you know this, you'll just see black bears running around, you'll see deer running around. I mean, it's just, it's crazy out there.
I've only been out there a couple times. I've been more to BT-11. I don't know if you've ever been to that area.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to BT-11 in like 2 months.
It's going to be freezing out there, I bet. Jesus.
Yeah. I'm hoping I'm just going to do that jock JTAC life with that heater, you know what I mean? So,
do they have do they have a setup out there for that? We always just went out to the tower and got attacked by mosquitoes.
Well, so it's an 18th Airborne Corps exercise that we're fitting ourselves in, that they've requested some special operations insertion into. but yeah, I mean, Navy Deer, dude, in the summertime, you'll drive through and there'll be like 7 black bears just chilling on the side of like the
Nice.
road into the range, and you're like, what the fuck is going on?
That's some
And
country
they're
shit out
massive. I
there.
mean, yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It is redneck as fuck
You
out there,
wouldn't
and it's
think,
amazing.
yeah, you wouldn't think like being coastal like that, it would be that
Yep.
country feeling, but it's like,
Yep.
it is very country, like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
weird.
Well, it's weird, right? And so like so obviously right? So Nags Head, Manio, like that whole area, right? And so people probably if we talk about Outer Banks, right? People are gonna be like, oh, the Netflix show, and it's absolutely nothing like that, right? Like it is, and it's weird, right? Because there's a ton of money out there, and then all of a sudden you like cross this threshold, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like there's trailers on top of trailers on top of trailers, but like 400 feet that way, there's like a $1.2 million boat. Like
Yeah.
what is going on, right? I mean that literally is like our home away from home. So we typically do 1 to 2 cast trips a quarter out to Dare County. I mean it's kind of just a constant rotation for us. So we're really well known by the hotel owners, bar owners, those kind of people.
Yeah, you almost become a
It is.
local. Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually joke about that we're probably the only people that are considered locals that aren't locals. We get treated like locals. There's a bartender, there's a bar out there. I'll give him a shout out, Jack Brown's. And the owner's he's done a lot of contract work and that sort of stuff. But like we'll walk in and he'll be like, hey, like he has a flag from our unit, like he's got a patch from our unit.
That's
Like
cool.
we'll walk in and even if it's busy, he'll be like, hey, there's seats over here, fill them in. And so he'll kind of just take care of us and slide us forward. So in those kind of areas, man, and I don't know the other coast areas in North Carolina. I mean, you probably do a little bit better than I do down in like the Lejeune, those Cherry Point, New River areas. But like coastal, as far as Nags Head, dude, is tourist dependent as crap, right? Like the second November hits, end of October, early November, I mean, season's done, right?
Yeah.
Tourist season's over. It's now local mode.
Local
And so
summer,
like to be like treated as a local out there is huge. Because we're not locals, we're visitors, but like they don't care because we're out there, we're spending money, we're having fun, we're always respectful. But we're bringing 15 people out, 15, 20 people out, and we're spending a week out there. And I mean, you're probably spending, each person's probably spending $20 a meal. So when these bartenders are only getting, maybe 30, 40 locals a night, then you add this 15, 20, military guys. So we're buying
who are all on
food.
per diem. Yeah.
We're all on per diem, right?
Totally cool to spend a little bit of money.
Using per diem for food, obviously.
Obviously.
So you get plugged into these bartenders and they're like, where should we go eat? And they're like, go here. Then you go to that place and you start building that relationship, so yeah. And I think that's the best part about what we do, right? Like you get to go travel and experience these interesting places that like, why would anyone go visit like Valdosta, Georgia?
Yeah.
Like, what's the need? There isn't one, right? Like it's an interesting place. Like I'll tell you that it is extremely interesting, right? It is very interesting. But like I couldn't foresee me taking a family trip to Valdosta, Georgia.
No.
Like why would you go to Poinsett, South Carolina? Like not really a thing that I would consider doing, for a family vacation.
Yeah.
But what do? We go there.
That's that TAD life, man. You're living like a ghetto rock star. You get some cheap motel, you get a little bit of money for food, and you're just hanging out with your homies.
Group rate?
Yeah.
So we have this thing, right? So our former group program manager, he like coined this phrase called parking lot pimping. And it's exactly what it is, dude, right? You just pull out some lawn chairs, get some coolers, and you just order food to be delivered, whatever the case is, and you just like chill in the parking lot and just turn on music, right? And like the locals and stuff, man, they'll come hang out with us and they'll like, we've had sheriff's officers pull up and like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, we're parking lot pimping. And
what are you doing?
Okay. They're literally like, what are you doing? They're like, we're trying to figure out what the fuck you're doing. We're like, well, we're gonna be here all night. Don't worry about us. Like, we're not driving. We're staying here. And they're like, all right, cool. If we get a phone call, and it's being too loud, like you guys will have to stop. Like, yeah, that's not a problem.
Yeah, we used to like to
So
come off the come out of the range in Gila Bend and go to
yep,
the there's this little like Mexican grocery store there with like no signs
yep,
on it. And they have the best carne asada meat, man. We'd go get that meat from there, take it back to the bomb grill over on
yep,
base and just have tacos and beer and stuff and like hang out and have a good time and then
yep.
if we had air the next day, wake up the next day and head out and fucking go drop some bombs
It's
and whatever
crazy.
and do it again.
It's crazy, right? Like you just get into this rhythm, and it's just like, all right, I'm gonna do all this paperwork. I'm gonna get it done. Hang out, drink with the boys, and then rinse, repeat. And it's like it's nuts how your body can do it. And then
It's
like you'll
fun
come
though.
home and you're like, man, I got 8 hours of sleep and I'm tired. It's like,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
fun though. It's good
but it
stuff.
is it's a blast, man. And like I will say that probably the best thing about what I do now is like I get to watch these JTACs from before school all the way through initial eval, right? And that's super rewarding, and that's why these cast trips I think are also that much fun, right? Because you get to like learn about people you don't really know.
Hmm.
You might work with them, you might hang out with them a little bit, but like now you're on a cast trip, you're drinking, but you're pretty much just going to talk about life. You get
Broing
to kind of
out.
know someone.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
broing out. You
you
get
got
to
to get to know
know.
someone.
Yeah, for
So
sure. That's it, man. That's the
it,
relationships, and it's like
yep,
lifetime friendships in short amount of time. Because you just get down and do work with people that you look around and it's like, dude, I respect everybody I'm here with. Everyone
yep,
earned their spot here. Everyone's like, it's all good people, and we have a good time. As long as everybody just comes out and works and does what they're supposed to do, and you know, after the work's done, then why not? Have a good time. Why not have a couple beers or whatever? Have the tacos
well,
and stuff.
and I feel like that's when some of the best like cast conversations happen too.
Oh,
You
for
know what I mean?
sure.
Because you're no longer, this person's no longer in the pressure of like a full mission profile, a graded event, right? And now he's just like, hey, hypothetically, if I did this, would that be okay?
Yeah. The one thing
So
the one thing I liked about the Marines cast program compared to like you guys is that we have our air officers that come down, right? And they're the pilots that
yep,
come down for their 2-year tour, which may not necessarily happen with the Air Force. What do they call them?
the ALO,
ALOs.
yeah,
So when we're sitting down after a trip, or even in between air on station or something like that, you have actual pilots sitting here. You have a Cobra pilot, or you have a fucking F-18 pilot. You could be like, hey, on this mission I did this. What would the pilot want to hear? What would the dude, want to hear or whatever? And not only that, like getting to have these cool conversations and like kind of more intellectual discussion on tactics and stuff like that.
yep,
Talk through some theories and stuff. But even like we got to go. I know when I was at the MEU, our assistant air officer, Hippie, he's an F-18 guy. He brought us down to Miramar and let us like jump in the F-18 simulators at Miramar. Like the actual
yep,
simulators the pilots are using, so we can kind of see like just stuff like that where you get just a little bit of a better understanding of what they're thinking or what they're doing, what's going on in the cockpit or what's going on in the gun
yep.
line. All that makes you a much more well-rounded and better JTAC.
So that's one of the things that we're working on too, right? Like, so obviously mortars are mortars, right? So like, our guys have mortars, like that's not new to them. But like we're working in to get them out to the 155s, the 105s, so they can see what does that look like? Like, is it, what does it look like on the fire direction center side when I send a call for fire?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into the conversations. So we've been fortunate enough that a couple of times that we've controlled out at DARE, specifically out at Navy DARE, like the FAC-A school up in Oceana, they'll be down doing like their ground phase.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll kind of help them out for like a quid pro quo, like, hey, you shoot us some vols, we'll cover down helping your FAC-A instructor on the ground, wrangle up these young officers who are trying to learn how to JTAC from the
Yeah,
sky.
for sure.
We'll help wrangle them and teach them the ground stuff.
Yeah.
And so but we've been, and we've also been fortunate enough that there's been times that we'll just get into these phone conversations while we're on the range, and the pilot's like, hey man, I got nothing else going on today. Like, you want to break it down? Like, hey, like we'll break it down. Like, what do I want to hear? What versus what
Mm-hmm.
you did. And we've gotten a good enough relationship now too, where like we work really closely with the guys out of Seymour Johnson, because there's a airspace just north of Fort Bragg, in around Newton Grove, North Carolina, that it's about 30-minute drive for us, right? So like if they throw airplanes up in the sky that need to do cast, like that's a real quick blast north for us. And the base is only like an hour north of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll sometimes drive and go out there and be like, all right, let's have a conversation. So, we'll go in the vault, we'll get into those weapons and tactics conversations. And in the special operations world, you're not really seeing like an ALO. You're not seeing, right? Because we handle it internal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to ask for JTAC support from the outside world because I can own it and it's mine. But because we don't have organic air assets, because our liaison elements are done at the higher echelons, right? So at the at the 05 level, I probably will be in the joint world where I might have a pilot that's in the in the JOC with me, but he's probably like part of like the collection team. He's probably part of like something about that world. Still a pilot, right? But really, like we have elements that get put into certain echelons.
Mm-hmm.
We put liaisons in like the battlefield coordination detachments. We put liaisons in the air operation centers. Like, so now they can be like, hey, special operations here, we need this done. And I kind of think that's where where the regular Army, that was a huge shift for me. Like we talked last time about how you get these teams, these TAC-P teams basically of an air liaison officer.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get a couple JTACs, typically get a couple a couple other dudes on that team. And that's your dude that's like, no, this is why you should do CAS. This is why you should do CAS. This is why you should do CAS. That doesn't exist where we are. Like, that's my job, and that's my JTAC's job, but in special operations, we're much more focused on the CAS aspect, right? Like, we're not sitting here, well, should I use HIMAR or should I use, 155, blah, 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 because those might be general support. They might not be direct support. You know what I mean? So like, if I have an F-18 flying overhead with, let's say 4 bombs on each jet, why the fuck would I call to try and get something when I already have it above me? So we definitely are much more, oriented towards utilizing aircraft. But if you start getting into like, we have, the AC-130, we've got other assets that are available to us. Like, we've got organic rotary wing in special operations. You know what I mean? We've got organic, we've got AC-130s, the conventional Army doesn't get AC-130s. Conventional TAC-Ps probably aren't going to work a whole lot with AC-130s outside of like, major training events. So it's interesting when we start getting into that whole like liaison role, because I feel like I've done much more liaising now than I did before. Like, networking is crucial in this job.
For sure.
And I've probably got a Rolodex of about 400, pilots or flying units on my computer, right? And it's just growing exponentially all the time. Because you never know if you're going to have an Osprey question. You know what I mean? You never know if you're going to have a Sea Stallion question, because operating in this community, like, if we put a air mission request up for, let's say vertical lift capability, what if the Marine Corps answers like, hey, we got a couple Osprey that need to do some work, like, here you go. And then, me as the air guy, right? I've got an air officer. I do have one. He's a rated Apache pilot, but like, I'm also the first person he comes to with a question. And it's like, hey, fucker, you're a pilot. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But he's like, yeah, I flew Apaches. I'm
Way
like,
different.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like, fair enough. So the liaisoning, and it's a much small, and you're talking echelons much smaller too. You might have, you start talking about some of these teams, and it's, you're talking a very small group of dudes who are doing the jobs of 30, 40 people.
Yeah. That's the name of the game in
so,
SOCOM. You're like one of one or one of two, rather than being on an entire team of people in that field.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to break down like like a special operations team, like a special forces detachment alpha, right? 12-man team. That's bare bone 12-man team, right? And that's if they're at 100% manning. And every person in that entity is 2, 3, 4 jobs per position.
For sure.
And now one of those dudes is now the JTAC, right? So like, and it's not this crazy thing, it's this job that requires an astronomical amount of focus and an astronomical amount of time. but that's on top of, did you go do your M4 range? Hey, we've got this
All the
certification
basic
exercise
stuff, yeah.
coming up. Like, hey, did you go to this networking class that you were supposed to go to so we could run X piece of equipment? And that's on top of also, oh shit, I need to go take personal leave time. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't had a day off in a year. Like, what the fuck is going on? So like, I feel horrible for these Green Berets, dude. Like, I feel horrible for them, man. I mean, it's nuts. Their op tempo is ridiculous. I mean, my dudes are calling me and they're like, hey, I've only got these days available to do casts. I'm like, all right, man, I'll see what I can do. So and there's only, and like, there's only so many things you can do in the simulator versus you have to do it live.
Yeah,
You know
for
what I mean?
sure.
So like, that's the other thing. I can go walk across the street to the sim any day I want.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a real simple thing. But like, you can't do certain controls in the sim, and you're only allowed to do other controls so many times in the sim per year.
Yeah, you gotta get those
So
live
like,
hits in.
yep. So you gotta you gotta reset that time if you already did it. So
Yeah, I was never a fan of the like in the Marines. When I was on the MEU, we had the recon detachment on ship with us, and they come with their own JTACs, and I say that with scare quotes for the reason that yeah, they went to the school, and that's probably the last time they did controls, or maybe they did some here and there, but it's not enough to be like proficient. For the most part, there's obviously a handful of guys that are pretty good, but for the most part, they have 5 jobs. It's like, yeah, I'm the recon guy. I'm also the assistant team leader. I'm also the breacher. I'm also the fucking, like whatever. There's like a stack of jobs. So I'm more of a fan of bringing in that skill set. Bring in, the attachment, the JTAC attachment. Just like you're not going to tell your average recon guy to go, hey man, go defuse that bomb. You bring in the EOD tech for that, for the very reason, just because this guy works demo, maybe he's a demo qualified guy, that doesn't mean he should work with every kind of bombs or every kind of thing. I think it's the same reason with like JTACs. There's too much on the line. There's too much that can be messed up, to have someone come in and have a very basic understanding. However, I do think it's important for them to understand the basic concepts of it so that, I used to tell my guys, like, dude, if I get smoked in the head, who's going to pick up the radio? One of you guys has to do it. So who's going to be the guy? And so someone has to be able to step up and do that emergency cast when necessary. But I'm not a big fan of like the operator level guys having to add that on to the mini tasks that they do just because there's so much shit. And it's like it takes a lot of focus and stuff, like you were saying, to maintain, your proficiency, your qualifications and everything, and just be good at your job as a JTAC.
Yep.
How are you going to manage that when you also have to go jump out of airplanes a certain amount of time? You have to go do demo a certain amount of time, or you got to go do, dives, or you got to go do, like there's a whole plethora of things that these guys are required to do. And it just doesn't really make sense. I'm more of a fan of like having, like when we would attach to the MEU, one of our fire support or one of our firepower control teams from ANGLICO that was attached to the MEU also, which is a 4-man team. It's a JTAC, a senior forward observer, a junior forward observer, and a radio operator, or a senior forward observer and then 2 radio operators, however that comes out. But there's always that JTAC, JFO combo. We would always like, hey, this group is going to be attached to the recon element to help bolster their fire support capabilities, just, so we can bring in some subject matter experts that can focus on the planning and focus on the stuff that the average person is not going to know. I've heard officers right out of school like, oh, I can do call for fire. And it's like, okay, you can go, this is me, adjust fire over. Yep. But can you register the guns? Can you tell me what it means when, there's a lot of stuff to the job. That's like telling an infantryman, like, yeah, I can clear a house because I went through like my very basic Marine combat training. Well, of course I can do it, but am I going to do it as a professional? Is like, you can do it. Do you know all the tricks or, So I don't know. It's one of those things where it's important to focus on, really.
So we have this conversation all the time, right? Obviously, right? So you have a very small group of us that this is all I do, right? I just JTAC. That's my job. My job is
you're living the dream, dude. Right? There's so many guys that are just jealous that they wish that they could do just that.
Like yeah, sure, I'm still a fire support, sergeant, so like I still have the aspect of like I need to, coordinate artillery, whatever, right? But like my primary mission set is, my fire support officer, he kind of focuses on that side of the house, right? Like doing those kind of things. I focus on the JTAC program management, right? So that's all I do. I'm TDY and I just drop bombs. That's all I do, right? But like, so we have this conversation all the time. You have a green JTAC and then you have a proficient JTAC, right? They're not the same. They're absolutely not the same, right? A proficient JTAC is one who's going to have like triple digit logins into the online system because he's just nonstop logging cast logs, right? I think I want to say I have like 300 controls or 400 controls now. I mean, it's astronomical, right? Like, and I've only been doing it for 2.5 years, so I'm just, so it's nonstop getting sets and reps in. But I have the time to do it. I've probably in of my 16 JTACs, I probably only have like 3 or 4 that I could be like, hey, 100% of these dudes are proficient, right? But these are guys that they're just getting after it because they're taking their own time that their team's off of training. They could be at home because they're green. They don't need to control, but they're like, hey, I wanna do this, so they're getting after it. And so I had this conversation with some of the guys at work, like maybe there should be, a different solution to supporting, the special operations guys, where, you create this locker of people, right? Like their sole job is JTAC and it's all they do, right? They go to school, graduate, we get them qualified, right? They're on the CDL, everything's good. But now, okay, hey, cash trips up, everyone in this fucking room, let's go, right? Or like, hey, I don't have anything else going on. We're gonna go to the sim. We're gonna fucking get into some complex, scenarios. Because one of the benefits I have is my sim is, a standard, executive steering committee certified sim. But I also in that same room, I have that virtual battlefield simulator. So like I can go and build like an Afghanistan super complex scenario where I can have, a stack of 10 airplanes flying around, moving enemy troops in contact, artificial intelligence is worked into it and those kind of things. And I could put a JTAC on an OP and like give him standard equipment and he's basically playing Call of Duty. But he can die in this scenario and he doesn't come back to life, right? And so like I can then put a ground commander next to him, right? All right, now that aspect is there. Your JTAC is out of the fight. What do you do? And so moving partner force, moving enemy, we can do CASEVACs, we can do all kinds of things where we can stress them the fuck out, where we're not burning DoD fuel, we're not, but I can put them in these scenarios. So is that the route we should go? Should we create this locker, this group of identified individuals that their sole job is to JTAC? That's it, right? Whether they're special operations dudes or like 13 Foxes, I don't know the answer to that question, right? But I think that might be the way that it goes. So we don't hit tracer burnout, right? Because like I've got JTACs. They're like, oh, I'm just gonna get green right before a trip, and it's like, well, that's probably not gonna go well. And today we were doing some training and he's the guy that was doing is one of those guys that's like, I'll just get green before I need to do my eval.
When you say get green, you mean hit all their qualification requirements, right?
Yeah. So right. So like, right, you've got your currency table requirements. And so I've got guys that are, they've been red for over a year. And it's like, hey man, when are you going to do JTAC? And they're like, oh, right before I need to go on this next trip. It's like, oh, like, yeah, I'll start getting current again about 3 months before about 3 months out.
Probably not a good idea.
What?
Yeah.
Like what? And so, and that's one of those things where it's like, all right, qualification, like maintaining currencies on the individual JTAC, but like me as a program manager is like, hey dude, I'm the one that has to fucking explain
why
this.
Yeah.
Like fuck you, dude.
Well, guys that sit off on the side, or put it off, a lot of times I think it's easier to put it off than it is to go and pick up the radio because they're fucking nervous because they know, it's a stress. It's a stressor when especially if you're being evaluated and stuff like that.
Yep.
I always told people, I'm like, every time I keyed the handset, I felt nervous. It didn't matter from the time I was just a new JTAC to the time I was an evaluator. Maybe even more so as an evaluator because I'm like, if I fuck up, everyone's going to sit here and be like, what the fuck? Star's fucking up, like, so I don't know. It's one of those things you gotta, if you're not doing it, you get out of practice and it's almost easier to be like, I don't want to because it's probably going to not go well, and I'm going to feel bad. I don't want to get punched in
Well,
the face today.
and like, right, like as an instructor evaluator, dude, like everything you say becomes gospel,
Yeah.
right? Like everything. So like, so and I think that's when I get the most nervous is like when I start doing debriefs and stuff like that, right? Like, cause like, what if I, so, right? Cause I'm obviously not going to read like a paragraph from the joint pub, right? Like I'm not going to sit there and be like, hey, according to X, paragraph X, blah, 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 and go through, right? I'm gonna be like, hey, look here, this is generally what it says. You know what I mean? But what's the reality that dude's going to go back and actually read that paragraph and not just listen to the paraphrase that I gave him? You know what I mean? And that's the other part too, is, you're supposed to be, objective, right? Instead of subjective, right? Like you really can't, when you start going into evaluations, right? Like, it's black and white, right? Like eval criteria is black and white, but like at what point are you as an instructor or evaluator allowed to be subjective, right? Like if you have a dude who's like barely squeaking by and you're like, man, I don't know if I would trust this dude to control without me standing right here, like, just so that's kind of that hard area where you're like, sometimes you got to play that bad guy. We're like, hey man, you didn't do anything bad, but like, yeah, no,
It happens, man. As an evaluator or a JTAC-I or JTAC-E or whatever, you have to be able to say that. You have to be able to have that uncomfortable conversation with that person and be like, hey man, you're fucking this up. Like this is what we got to do to fix it. And honestly, it's happened to me 2 or 3 times where they just weren't safe. And I was like, you are unsafe. And I told their commander, I'd have to sit down with the company commander or whatever and be like, hey, look, this dude is not allowed to do any live controls without me standing next to him. I almost don't want you to have him do simulated controls with you guys because I think he'll fuck it up and it'll make, it'll mess up. Yeah, it'll mess up the training because you're getting negative value because he's inputting bullshit. And it's like, I mean, what's the alternative? And I've had company commanders and first sergeants be like, really? I mean, is this going to mess this guy's career up? Is this? And I'm like, dude, honestly, it's not about that. It's unsafe. You're telling me, would you stand next to him with the 2,000-pound bomb coming in? Are you going to feel comfortable with it when I'm telling you I'm not comfortable with it? Like, because that's what you're asking me to say. Go ahead, man. Because once you're qualified and once you're designated by the commanding officer that you're good to go, and I've signed off on it as the evaluator that you're good to go, that's it. He can go out and drop whatever they have available and whatever he's approved to drop, And it's like, it's just there's too many things that can go wrong where you can't be fucking around with guys that don't want to take the job seriously. I don't know if we talked about it or I've talked about it before, but sometimes it seems like some guys just want to become a JTAC just to say that they're a JTAC. And then once they got the qualification, it's like, dude, I'm done. Like, I just want to walk around and say I'm a JTAC. I don't want to do all the fucking work that it takes to become really good at the job. I feel like that's a
conversation we've had before.
Yeah, probably is.
It's funny, right? So I deal with, some of the conventional guys, oh, how do I become a JTAC? How do this, how do that? And it's like, all right, man, first stop. Let's get back to the basics. Like, can you call for fire? Can you do X? Like, stop trying to get here if you can't be here.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, and a lot of guys, they look at JTAC. Oh, it's just so cool. Like, and it's like, well, why do you want to be a JTAC? Well, because like, you can clear aircraft hot. And it's like, all right, cool, that's great and all, but like when you look at, the next fight, right? Like, is CAS going to be a thing? Who knows, right? Like, the answer is who knows, right? So yeah, cool. I get to be a JTAC. I get to stay cleared hot, but also, if you can't put an airplane there to do the close air support, like, there's no JTAC needed.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of guys, I talk to 13 Foxes all the time, and they're like, oh, I feel like we should be allowed to be JTACs. I'm like, okay, what's your justification? What's your reasoning? Oh, well, blah, 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 like JFO sustainment. I was like, all right. And like the last time we talked about that JTAC JFO integration, like getting with your ASOSs. No, stop being a lazy bitch and just fucking coordinate. Right. And like, and that, I think that's one of my biggest, like, everyone's trying to look for the easy way out, right? Everyone's looking for that easy button. How do you maintain a JFO program? All right, well, every year you have to do a currency event with a JTAC. Right? It's one of the requirements. You got to do a currency event with a JTAC. And they're like, well, if I'm a JTAC, I don't have to, my JFOs don't have to worry about that anymore. Or you go to your ASOS where your JTACs are, and you're like, hey, man, we're doing some JFO training. Here's our time periods that we're looking at. Are you guys available by chance during that time period?
Yeah.
Just 1 or 2 guys, nothing crazy. Or you get on the trips to your JTACs, right? Go out, do live casts, or like when they're in the sim, offer JFOs up. And that's probably one of the benefits of a JFO system compared to like JTACing, right? JFOs, they can realistically like VBS. So we use VBS3, right? It's the new system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the current system, I shouldn't say new. That's that virtual battlefield like simulator.
Yeah.
Right. So you can do crazy shit in there, right? But like they can simulate, emulate, and all those sort of things, which is required by the JFO MOA for certain equipment, right? And so so a JFO, realistically, you can put JFOs in these VBS systems, and then you could just bring a JTAC in, right? Whoever needs JTAC JFO integration events, all right, there you go. That's all complete. But now you can make the scenario more realistic, more stressful, right? And you get that training. Like I'll talk to guys. Well, why should you be a JTAC? Oh, because like I just want to do this. Then go to the Air Force, like and you got to, and like what a lot of guys don't realize is that like that's a career field.
Yeah, for sure.
Like that. It's not just it's an additional duty, right? Because like everyone assumes a JTAC is like this thing. It's this MOS, like that's it, right? No, it's an additional qualification. Like you don't come out like the Air Force now, right, with their current pipeline. That it's a little bit different. Right. So the Air Force is now.
How long would they normally spend as like a ROMAD or something before they became a JTAC?
So I from my understanding, like personally, I think that's kind of like a unit specific thing, right? And like personal performance, like how do you do as a human being as a ROMAD, right? But like the last time we talked, when I went to QC, there were dudes that have only been in the Air Force for a handful of months. You know what I mean? Like 4 or 5 months.
That's crazy.
There's one dude that had been a ROMAD for 8 fucking years or some shit like that. But that's because he kept getting hurt. He got hurt, deployments, and some other things like that, right? So like life was just kicking him in the fucking head, and then he'd start getting back up, and you kick him in the head again. Right. And then there was other guys in there that like they were ROMADs. They got ready to go to school. Deployment came up. They went on a deployment, and then they went to school. Right. Like so the time period is really different. But now it's a straight through pipeline. So like a TAC P in the Air Force, like they come out of tech school, their pipeline will put them through JTAC QC before they even get to their unit. So now you're gonna have a dude that's school trained, right? Now it's up to the unit to train them, get them designated, get them on the seat, get them, the way they need to go, which is great. Which I think is gonna solve a lot of these like shortfalls of manning. You start looking at, does every battalion get the support they need? Probably not, right? But again, like these guys are basing it off of what we've been doing the last 21 years, 20 years, whatever, in CENTCOM, right? Like that's not a thing anymore. Like pull back from, you want to be a JTAC because like you want to go to Afghanistan or Iraq and stay cleared hot. You don't actually understand that like that's a different fight than probably what's going to happen next, right? God forbid, if something happens next, right?
Yeah.
I don't foresee it being a coin
Something's going to happen at some point. It's just human nature.
It's human nature, right? Like for whatever fucking reason, it's just human nature. Like you look back at history, and there's, especially look at America's history, right? I mean, we're what 250-ish years old, as far as like a formed country, right? Like 250 years is what, in 5 years or whatever. July 4th, 1776 or whatever, so July 4th of 26, I mean, it's, 250 years. In that 250 year span, we've literally been at war every single fucking century. Like, if not multiple wars.
Yeah, maybe every decade. Might break it down to.
Yeah.
There's been some kind of conflict every decade for sure.
I mean, you go into the 1900s. I mean, you go in the 1900s, right? I mean, shit, dude. World War I and World War II, Vietnam, Korea, like Desert Storm, at one point
Grenada.
Panama, like
Panama,
Somalia.
Somalia. What was the one? I don't know. There's all kinds of conflicts. It's crazy.
Like the 1900s, dude. I mean, it probably was like at least once a decade. There was some
Probably.
sort of bullshit going on.
Something.
And then now we're in the 2000s, and literally the last 20 years has been a nonstop conflict.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And the global war on terror is not just linked to like one aspect of the global region. Like it's spread out. But like these guys are basing they're basing this I want to be a JTAC thing off of like what they know, right? They know that bombs are getting dropped in CENTCOM. What they don't realize is like we already shut one battle space down, right, in Afghanistan. We've now stepped out of a combat role in Iraq officially today, according to Army Times as of today, or whatever
really?
It was. Yeah, apparently. I don't know. I
thought that was gone forever ago.
Well, supposedly it like stopped the combat role in like April. Like combat missions stopped, but like the advise assist missions were still going on.
I wonder who was doing combat missions in April. I mean, I would imagine SOCOM doesn't fall under this agreement because they're always out hunting ISIS and doing their thing.
Well, right? Like obviously we can't get into
obviously,
weeds, but like
yeah.
I'm
just saying
likely,
as an assumption.
SOCOM probably had stuff going on. But I mean, arguably, right? Like you, at some point, like if you're still putting U.S. forces in an area, like there still has to be a bubble of safety, right? Like, so in theory, like let's say you had 82nd Airborne at a FOB in Iraq, like there's still a bubble that has to be maintained. Like you can't just like sit inside the wire and you're just like,
yeah.
Okay, it's all safe. It's all safe. It's all fine. Like you have to go to a certain point where like, all right, this 5-kilometer bubble, whatever the fuck it is safe. Like we've gone out, we check it every week. Like at some point, like so at some point, like there might not be, like in my mind, the combat mission thing is like, we're no longer going out, like, guns out, kicking in doors, snatch and grabbing. Like now we switched to the advise assist where, the partner force is the one doing that. We're sitting back like, hey, we're back here. Like, call us if you need some tips and pointers.
In theory,
like, oh, you need a bomb dropped. All right, cool. We'll help protect you. But like that's kind of where my head says that's at. Obviously, I have no fucking clue. That's echelons above my reality.
Well, it's got to be an interesting time to be in the military right now. And I know, my buddies that are in the Marines that are still JTACs and stuff. Obviously, the fire support community in the Marine Corps is having this big shift of what's going on because they're kind of stepping away from tube artillery and focusing more on like HIMARS and stuff like that. And, drone warfare is obviously becoming more of a thing. And, so I don't know. They're pivoting to the Pacific is the whole thing. So they're worrying about like, how do we work on these different islands and small teams? And I'm like, man, some of this sounds super fucking cool. Like, it sounds like they're doing some super cool stuff.
I mean, and the Marines are now having to get back into, like, amphibious, like, assaults. Like,
well, we've always...
Like, well, but, like, now, like, you're in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, like, there's no need for, an amphibious assault. So, like, now... And I think that's where the shift from cannon artillery to rocket artillery is going for the Marine Corps, right? Like, getting that long range strike where like, okay, let's say you guys, I don't know the nomenclature of the ship, but like, it's basically like the helicopter ship, right?
The LHD
that you guys,
it looks like a small aircraft carrier.
Yeah. It's basically just a micro aircraft carrier, right? Yeah. In theory, an F-35 can land on it.
Yeah. It's an LHD.
It can VTOL, right? I mean, could you slap some shit on top of that and shoot it? Probably. You know what I mean? Like,
I think so. Yeah, maybe they have, maybe they haven't.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question.
Cruise missiles.
You've seen the news.
Cruise missiles are still a thing, and I've had
absolutely tomahawks and shit like that. Yeah.
Paul, I was talking about Paul Smith earlier. He actually got to do one of the first, like they were doing basically observer on the ground, call for fire, kind of working through how they would do, everything with all those working parts and stuff. Yep. And I was like, dude, that's super cool. It's like one of those like things you don't really think about doing. And he had an opportunity to go out to one of these islands off the coast of California and do actual like, drop actual tomahawks on stuff. I was like,
T-lamp strikes.
Yeah. I was like, that's fucking cool, man. So I don't know. It's always evolving, so it's got to be an interesting time to kind of see the technology shift and stuff like that. But it's one of those jobs where we kind of alluded to it earlier, where it's like you, no matter what, it doesn't matter if you got the laser ranger designator or excuse me, laser rangefinder or target designator, or you have tablets or whatever. None of that matters if it fucking shits to bed and you can't do it with a map and compass and some binos. You know what I'm saying? If you don't know the basics, if you don't understand the very basics of how to do this stuff, all that other stuff becomes a crutch, and then it becomes a liability when it goes down on you. So
yeah, and like that's something we do with our JTACs, right? Like, so we'll middle of an FMP, middle of an eval, we'll just be like, all right, and ATAC's broken. What do you do?
Yeah.
Right. And like, obviously, like, we're not like, so for us, right, like, we try and avoid doing that, like, if like DoD live fly airs there, right, because that's a really expensive like wash if we're not careful.
Yeah, I don't want to waste
so
the pilot's
like
time for sure.
but if we notice that like the JTAC built like super solid GRGs, right, like, something like that like, I can fucking fight off this, let's do it, right? We'll be like, all right, hey, ATAC's down, close it, fight off your paper products, what are you going to do? And so, but if they don't have solid products, usually what we'll do is we'll wait for once the fly leaves, we'll typically go like notional assets, and then we'll fight that way.
For sure.
Because it's one of those conversations, right? Like, what do you do? What do you do if something's degraded? You know what I mean? Like, what do you do if you can't use a laser rangefinder because it can't get fucking GPS signals?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? What do you do if you can't use your laser designator because cloud coverage? What are the answers to these questions that you're gonna get, the situations you're gonna get thrown, right? Because I don't know of anyone in the world that controls weather. You know what I mean? Like, so you might have to figure out, like, can you in theory ballistically put a certain type of bomb on a target? You know what I mean? Like, or how do you have that conversation with your commander? Like, hey, sir, we can't do fucking anything.
Mm-hmm.
What do you get? We also take away ATAC because guys get so sucked into it. You know what I mean? Like, think about your phone, right? Like, you'll go to any Starbucks and go sit in a Starbucks, right? What is everyone fucking doing usually?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Faces in a phone, faces in a computer, right? They're not paying attention to anything that's going on around them.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's a thing. JTACing.
Yeah.
You'll get dudes that are just like
in the map,
phone open, and they're just like do, and then they'll look up, and me as the GFC, right? I'll be fucking 300 meters away because I walked away.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and this dude doesn't even know that I walked away. And I'm doing it because I can hear that we're gonna be pushing to a strike because I wrote the scenario to go into a strike,
mm-hmm.
and I'll fucking walk away and then be like, hey, JTAC, what's going on? Like, I'm not walking back to you. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, for sure. Situational awareness is key, for sure.
It's and so we were trying to teach JTACs, like, hey, look up. It's okay to use technology. That's fine. I'm not saying don't use technology, but like, look up. Where are you at in time and space?
What's moving across the battlefield? Things could be moving. Yep. You're not even watching.
Get it. Yeah, I mean, like, dude, we'll put, like, if we know it's dry cast, like, if it, obviously if we're out in one of like the military operating airspace spots, right? Like, that's dry cast automatically because it's not on a range. Like, if we're on a range and we know it's dry cast, like, dude, we'll just drive a vehicle down the range.
Yeah, for sure.
And it'll be like, hey man, we're getting reports there's a vehicle driving around the range, like driving around the target area. Do you know anything about that? And they'll be like, yeah, it's nothing. They're like, no, like, there's actually a vehicle out there. Like,
mm-hmm.
do you know what is going on right now? And that's, but like, that's getting back to that, that conversation with these 13 Foxes, like, being able to do the basics. Like, cool, you have a cool laser, like you said, but does it work? Cool, you have this really cool phone, does it work? Can you do the basics? How do you read a map at night? Like,
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, do you have an actual military map that works at night? And are you using a red headlamp, and then using a red marker? You know what I mean? Like, it's things like that. But like, nope, they want to be a JTAC because they want to have the bino nods. They want to have the cool high cut helmet. They want to do all the things that JTACs look like and do, without understanding that
there's a lot of work there.
There's a lot that goes into being a JTAC.
A lot of stress.
You're talking a 5-week school. You're talking, so for us, it's a 5-week school or 4-week school, and then it's at a minimum of 4 full mission profiles before we can say they're initially eval ready, and all 4 of those have to be goes. Right. And so on average, you're doing about 5 to 6 full mission profiles before we put you in an eval, unless you just crush it. Right. Unless you just crush it. And obviously, there's a split of day and night at full mission profiles because we want to expose you to day and night cast because it's a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure.
And so now you're talking, let's say 6 is the number, right? Well, that's on top of all of the other training that's going on, not just for you as a trainee, but like I've got currency guys that are out here that need to get current. I've got other training status guys. I've got guys that need evals. So like you might get 1 or 2 of those full mission profiles on a cast trip. Like now you're going to go, all right, well, we're going to push you to the next cast trip. So like it takes 3-4 months sometimes to make it do to JTAC.
Yeah.
And that's a green JTAC, right? That's not a proficient JTAC. That's a green JTAC. You give me him for 4 to 6 dedicated months, I could probably make him a proficient JTAC. You know what I mean? Because he's going to be on every cast trip. He'll be in the sim when it's available, like all those things.
Yeah, you got to get reps in for sure.
And like that's the thing. Like I could go call I guarantee you I could go call one of my friends tomorrow and be like, hey man, what are you doing? He'd be like, well, I'm just hanging out in the office, chilling, not really doing anything. Well, why aren't you, like, you guys aren't training? Oh no, we got nothing going on, so we're not doing anything. It's like this is what we're talking about. Like,
there's to a point. Some of us get so like wrapped up into our own jobs and we love it so much and we see the seriousness of it that we want other people to understand it like we do. And then we kind of drive, that's how you get burnout. You got to be careful. There's a fine line between like constantly exposing someone to different scenarios and getting reps in on missions and stuff like that. And then overdoing it just to overdo it, and now people are becoming burned out. They're never home. They're never,
Well, and so that goes back to like, my last job at Sill, right? And so like we would go to units and be like, talk to guys, kind of, we do staff visits, right? So we do a SAV, right? And so we go to these units, they request us to come out there, they want us to look at their JFO programs, whatever the thing was, right? So we go out there and we look at it, we talk to them. And that entire week we're there, these guys are just sitting around and they're like complaining because, they don't have enough time to do JFO evals or JFO training or whatever. And it's like, what the fuck is going on right now? I'm like, oh, nothing. Well, do you have like a simulator? Well, yeah, it's right over here in this office.
Get on it. Yeah, get on it.
I'm like, obviously, like if you just came off a field problem, dude, take some fucking time off. Like you do reset, right? Not just on your equipment, but your fucking body. Like absolutely, like reset yourself. But don't be the person that bitches because you don't have time to train. But then you're sitting in your office checking your fucking Facebook for 6 hours a day when you have a fucking call for fire trainer literally 30 feet away from you.
It sounds like, and that's so you have your JFOs. Your 13 Foxes, your forward observers in the Army, become the JFOs. Are they ever with the JTACs? Are they ever like,
So that comes down to that conversation we had the last time we talked, right? Like that is on that fucking, whether it's the team chief, whether it's the battalion fires NCO, the brigade fires NCO, right? Whatever echelon that has the fucking foresight to be like, dude, we should probably do stuff. Like I could tell you as a company team chief, dude, I knew, and this is me as a company, dude, I knew my battalion ALO, my battalion my battalion senior JTAC, and then the 2 junior JTACs under him, and then the 2 ROMADs, like by name had their phone number, right? Like, because I would go to this was back when I was at Carson, I would go to 13th ASOS, I'd just fucking I'd go over there and be like, hey man, I'm so-and-so from X unit. I'm trying to like link up with my JTAC so I can kind of put a face to a name and like, this is who they are. Started building that relationship. And then we went into rotation at NTC at Fort Irwin, California. And literally like during the pre-train up, we're doing JFO-JTAC stuff, just kind of trying to make sure, getting a couple JFOs green and helping getting JTACs green before the rotation starts. And like, dude, I walked in and the senior JTAC was like, hey, this is, I think I was Sergeant Raith at the time. Maybe I was Staff Sergeant Raith at the time. I don't remember. And like, he's like, JFO, super competent. he's going to teach this class, right? And literally just handed off the instruction because he knew who I was and he knew all those things. And then as I started to move up in the echelons, that was like the first thing I did. I would go to the ASOS. Hey man, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'm just looking for the people that are usually going to be working with me. Just get plugged in.
Yeah.
And so if that's not occurring, then no, the JFOs aren't with the JTACs, right? Which is a problem. But I will also say that like part of that too, I think, is with the whole CENTCOM coin fight, right? The JTACs kind of deployed really interestingly, right? So like the Air Force would basically build like this expeditionary unit with X requirements, right? Like this number of this number of that, this, break it down that way. And hey, we need this number of JTACs and X ASOS, that's yours to do. Regardless of who the maneuver unit was, it was just like, and I need 30 JTACs and 14th ASOS, you're the ones providing it. They're out of the unit that you're going to be supporting is out of Fort Lewis, Washington. It's like, well, there's an ASOS at Fort Lewis, Washington. Like what?
Yeah.
What? Right. And so that was part of that. Right. And those dudes were getting worked like a motherfucker, man. I mean, those dudes were, they'd come home, rest, reset, and they're fucking back overseas almost immediately.
So you guys don't have like traditional command support relationships between like who the JTAC support? Like I always support this brigade or this battalion.
So go back to go to Bragg, right? So Fort Bragg, 14th ASOS is 82nd Airborne's ASOS, right? So that is 82nd Airborne Division's ASOS. Like that is typically who's going to support 82nd Airborne. And that is known and that's understood, right? X brigade probably has X flight, right? So like, let's say 1st Brigade, 82nd has Alpha flight from 14th ASOS, right? Alpha flight's basically like a company, essentially, right? So Alpha flight supports 1st Brigade, but like how it was working is like, even if that relationship was established, if you go forward, that those guys might not be the ones that are supporting you forward. Right. Because there's no opcon, TACON, like those kind of levels of command. Like what is the, agreement level? It was, hey, we have a request for support for X number of JTACs and you're up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, and we got into this conversation while I was at JTAC QC and I was like, well, wait a minute, you have division aligned operation squad, like air support operation squadrons. Like they're divisionally aligned. Like 14th ASOS is known 82nd Airborne. I think it's 15th ASOS is, I think, Fort Hood. I think, don't quote me on that. I'm terrible with where all the ASOSs are unless I'm like at that installation. Like 19th, there's 19th, there's ASOSs everywhere, right? Every Army installation that has maneuver has an ASOS.
Yeah. Well, the reason I was asking, I guess, is in the Marines, it's different because your JTACs and your JFOs almost all come from artillery. There's infantry guys they send before deployment, like, hey, send a couple of the guys from the companies to go get JFO qualified if we can or whatever. But almost exclusively, there's the exceptions like the recon guys and some MARSOC guys occasionally, but almost exclusively they come from the 0861 community. And I guess the good thing about that is when I'm sitting in my shop and I go, I'm a Lance Corporal forward observer, my corporal is a forward observer, but he's also a JFO, and then Sergeant so-and-so is getting screened to become a JTAC, and Staff Sergeant so-and-so is already a JTAC, and we all work together already every day. So a lot of times at 10th Marines when I was there, our JFOs were actually really good, and at ANGLICO, because we're all together anyways. And it's like, well, hey, I've gotten as many reps as I need in the sims. Bring the JFO over here. Let's go through. Okay, you got all the basic JFO stuff done. Let's talk about, let's say I get shot in the head. You're going to learn how to do it as a JTAC from beginning to end so that, you're the next choice to take over if something was to happen. Yep. And so it's kind of weird hearing like that they're so separated from those guys because the I don't know, it's all one community, it's all one group of people, so we all know each other. It's for the most part.
That's the argument that like 13 Foxes make, right? Like, well, hey, if you look at it how it's done this way, well, like the Army, we don't really have a leg to stand on as far as like needing organic JTACs, right? So like H-64s are not treated as CAS; they're maneuver elements, right? They can own land,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is mind blowing when you think about it, because it's an aviation asset, but like it's not a CAS platform.
Yeah.
So right, whereas like the
Well,
Marine Corps,
it could be. It's just not used as
yeah,
one.
exactly. But it's not. But it's not treated as one, right? Yeah, it's an attack helicopter. Everyone knows that, and it's really good at fucking killing things. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. But like, there's no one that has to say cleared hot
Mm-hmm.
at all, right? You can any person in the United States Army, actually in the United States military, can fucking talk to an Apache, right? Like there is absolutely no fucking I am not a JTAC. Like that doesn't exist, right? Because they don't care. Um, and so, whereas in the Marine Corps, you have organic fighter fixed wing, you have organic rotary wing attack, right? And that are treated as CAS platforms, and that's how they're used. So like, there's more of an argument. But like in the Army, a lot of the 13 Fox I talked to, that's one of their things. We're like, well, if I was a JTAC, like we wouldn't have to outsource the Air Force. And like we could run this, we could run that, we could do this, we could do that. And I'm like, yeah, agreed. However, we don't have organic CAS systems, right? And the entities within the United States Army that have organic CAS systems have organic JTACs, right?
Yeah.
So like, so USASOC has 160th SOAR, right? They have CAS platforms, hence why USASOC has JTACs, right?
So all the guys you at the beginning of the interview, you said that you have about 60 people in your shop, and that are JTACs. Are all those Army dudes or any of those Air
So
Force?
nope, they are so every single JTAC with within our unit with a very small number of them. I want to say it's like 6 of us or 7 of us are everyone else is special operations, and they're all Army dudes.
Okay.
So now going down range, right? Like we might get augmented to CCT, we might get augmented to attack P. But again, mission set dependent, those kind of things. But we don't have to, right? I don't need to, because
Yeah.
I've got one. The benefit that if we do get one is now I have 2, right? So that
For sure.
whole, like, if one goes down, well, I have another one. So there's really no like, oh fuck, what do I do? My JTAC's dead. There's a dude that's already there again who's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
But like, so it's an interesting thing, because like our shops, right? So like, I work in X battalion on my own with my fire support officer, and then we have a JTAC locker up at the next echelon, that's only about 6 people, 7 people, and their sole job is like overall program management, and then they're like, that's where most of the evaluators reside, right? Is up at that echelon, because evaluations have to happen one echelon above.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
But like, so you sit here, right, and it's like, all right, cool. But again, it gets to that conversation of like, how many hats can these dudes wear before we start getting into serious problems?
Mm-hmm.
And like, so we have this conversation, right? Just sitting, drinking, bullshitting. Like, how do we fix that? Do we make it where, there's just this dedicated group of individuals that are maintained at a certain echelon, they're maintained at a certain level, where like, hey, X people are going out and doing, prepping for deployment. You're their JTAC. You're going to do all the stuff with them. Hey, this element's going and doing this. You're their JTAC. Train up with them. And is that the answer, or do we keep doing it the way we're doing? And all of us kind of come to the same conclusion, like that's probably what should be done, but like no one knows how to like really break it down to where it's like, all right, hey commander, this is what we should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it turns into the manning issue, right? So now I'm going to take a dude out of that unit, out of this unit, out of this unit, out of this unit. Let's say I take 45 people total, right? Well, that's 45 less bodies that they now have to backfill, and they already have a manning issue.
Yeah.
So it's just, how do we find this it's a fine line to dance, right?
For
And
sure.
it's this very interesting thing. And that's where I came in. That's where one of the last times we talked about this, I was like, hey, could you do 13 Foxes in that role, right? My only job in the world is artillery, is fires. It's my only job. We're usually pretty fucking good at it, right? But then turns into like the sustainability and the affordability, right? So 13 Foxes in the organization that I'm in, we typically spend about 3 to 5 years total right? And it's typically about 3 years because it's an E7 job. By the time you're leaving this job, you've probably made it E8 now. And so you really can't stay in an E7 billet as an E8, right? Like you kind of got to move up and out. And you got to go to that next level. So you get a dude, not a JTAC, you've made him a JTAC that took about, let's call it 6 months. Great. All right. I've got him for 2.5 more years. Well, at X time, he'll become an instructor. Awesome. I made him an instructor, but I've only got him for, let's say, 8 more months. All right. He's on orders. He's fucking out of here. Great. Now I got to replace him. Now I got to restart the cycle. Right. So is the answer that we bring in guys that are a little bit younger, build some positions within the organization that, within this locker that basically allows us, all right, hey, Sergeant E5, you get to come, you've been selected, you're coming up, make them a JTAC. By the time they're hitting staff sergeant, they're ready to be an instructor. By the time they're hitting like senior staff sergeant, early sergeant first class, all right, you're now an evaluator. You know what I mean? Hey, you've been here for 8 years. Thanks for all your fucking work. Regular Army wants you back. You know what I mean? Like, is that the route we go? Like, so it's one of those conversations. Just like, well, fuck, man. Like, what's the answer? Because now I'm creating a shortage of 13 Foxes across the Army, right? That now has to be upped in numbers. So, because if you were to break it down, say 45 13 Foxes to support X number of teams across an entire group, maybe it's not 45, maybe it's 30. You know what I mean? But like, that's 30 per group, and so let's say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, right? So that's 150 fucking people, and that's not including the positions that already exist, right? So now you're probably talking about 200 people that the Army would then have to be able to backfill, right?
It's a big mess.
It's a big mess. So it's this thing, but like, are we looking for quantity, or are we looking for quality over quantity, or are we looking for quantity over quality?
For sure.
Right. And that's where you get into those numbers, like those commanders' intent of like, hey, I want 1 JTAC per team. It's like, cool, awesome, support it, love it. However,
just not there. Yeah.
That's where you get a green JTAC versus a proficient JTAC, because there's that argument of like, this dude's at tracer burnout, man. Like, he's at tracer burnout. Like, on top of trying to accomplish special operations stuff where he needs to advance his career, right? Like, he's also now doing things to maintain currency proficiency of being this other thing.
Yeah, it's too much, man. I'm with you on that. So, it's way too much. The trying to add the being a JTAC on top of other stuff is outside of the fire support world is just too much.
So in that, right? And so what do you do? So my suggestion, right, during these conversations of during the parking lot pimping was, just do we sit there and make a case for like, hey, this should be part of a 13 Fox career field, right? You can assess, right? So basically do like last time, I talked about MARSOC, right? How they kind of do a screen, or they kind of do an assessment of like, hey, does this person belong, right? And is that what we do? Do we run an assessment and selection basically where physical, mental, we kind of check the blocks of like, would this person work in a small team? Would this person do this? But then you get into the conversation of like, all right, this person's going to be operating within special operations, but they're not special operations qualified people, right? And so like, you start getting these gray areas of like, there's certain things that like, now these guys might have to go to special operations schools, but they have no training in the special operations community, right? And so what does that pipeline look like? You know what I mean? So like, do you build a course for these specific special operations support guys where they're not coming out special operations qualified, but they've gone through, small unit tactics. They've gone through some of these courses that like the actual special operations dudes have gone through. They learn to shoot better. They learn to move better. They learn to communicate better. They kind of do those things. And do we dig into the weeds when we're sitting there drinking, and we'll just be like, well, what about this? What about that? What if we do this? What if we do this? And it's like, cool, again, but like, what's the sustainability and affordability, right? Like, now we're talking creating an entire fucking career deviation, right? So like 13 Foxes are this is the route we're going. Hey, E1, 3, 4, you're skill level 1. These are your positions. E5, this is your position. E6 this is your position. E7, E6, you kind of broaden out a little bit. E7, you broaden out even more, right? And then you go back down once you hit E8, right? You kind of start funneling back into like, hey, you can do these positions. E7's probably one of the most lenient as far as being a 13 Fox, like what you can and can't do. You can be senior instructors, you can get you can work at ROTCs, you can do the job I'm doing. There's kind of a much, I feel like as an E7, a little bit bigger of a scope of what I can and can't do.
Yeah.
But like now I'm talking about, here's this career path, and I'm like, and now there's a new one. And then it has to merge back in at some point and continue moving forward, right?
Or
and
not,
so,
or you just make it one that just splits off.
Yeah, right. But then what does that look like for dudes that are trying to make E8 and E9? You know what I mean? Like,
well, now they become an E8 and E9 within that field only. This is kind of the argument that been having a lot of people were having in the Marine Corps about why do we send guys to go become JTACs to 2 to 3 years later. We're like, all right, thanks for being a good JTAC. Now you've started to learn shit. Come back and now you're a fires chief. Yep. You're not doing JTAC stuff. Or hey, I need you to go be a recruiter. It's like what or they could stay in that field and become very good, very proficient, and like really plus up that the experience and everything there.
And so that was a conversation of like bringing in like an E5, let's say, right, running him, 6 to 8 years. You know what I mean? Where he's now hitting like, all right, hey, I've made the E8 list. Like, it's time for me to fucking start, because then you start getting into like, okay, well, now we're gonna shrink back down to like, all right, there's only X number of E8 positions. Let's say every group headquarters had 113, 13 Zulu, which is the first echelon of the for the E8 and E9s. So you have 13 Zulu 5 and a 13 Zulu 6, right? So Zulu 5 would be an E8, Zulu 6 would be an E9. And so like so that now you've created one of those positions per group. All right, well, that means one person of this platoon of 30 and, of the 4 E7s, let's say, that's in this platoon can fill that billet, right? Well, now the next echelon has to have, realistically, it should have a pay grade higher, right? So now the 2-star level should have a 13 Zulu 6, right? So now he should have an artillery sergeant major. Well, how do you create those positions and make sure that those people that are in those positions aren't just some random 13 series person, right? So 13 Zulu, we're no longer MOS specific. That is like, right, that could be a former gun bunny, that could be a former FDC nerd, that could be a former rocket nerd, that could be a former radar nerd, right? All those people, to include myself, we're all now merged into one. We're equals, right? And so how do you screen those positions that are brand new, no one's filled yet? You know what I mean? Like, how do we start screening those and filling? Like, how do we make sure that if we're going to create master sergeant positions, right, at the group levels, that dude that's a Zulu 5 is actually a former JTAC or at least 13 Fox experience, right? And he's spent most of his career as a 13 Fox. Now you got to do the same for a Zulu 6 slot, for that Sergeant Major slot. Yeah. Right. And so now you're leaning hard on Big Army to be like, hey, these are the manning requirements that have to be met. Right. And so, so that's where that conversation comes in of like, well, what the
it's messy.
The right answer.
Yeah. It's messy when you start digging into it, for sure.
Yep. And coming from a dude who just left TRADOC, right, I kind of have a little more foresight into it, because that was a lot of what I did, right? I would sit down and be like, all right, well, these positions need to be authorized this, these positions need to be authorized that, right? And you kind of get into the online system of what's called FMS Web. That's kind of that's how we tracked our MTOs for personnel and equipment. And like you could go in there and see all the numbers and the ones and the zeros of like who goes where and what does what. And that's kind of why I start digging into those weeds, right? Like, all right, well, what's the right answer? And who's the person that has to buy first, right? Do we get the group, the 06 commands to be like, hey, 2-star command, we think this is a good idea. Could we start looking at this? Or do we go the other route where it's like, hey, 06 command, you think this would be smart? Hey, we think that would be smart. All right, hey, we're going to go talk to the FA branch and kind of pitch this to them, right? See how they feel about it. Hey, FA branch, you think this would work? Hey, that could work. All right, perfect. Thanks. Now I've got the 1-star, the FA branch, and the 06 command. Merge those together. Hey, 2-star. People are starting to say this might be a good idea.
All the bureaucracy, man. It's too much. Right? It's too much bureaucracy to make it happen.
But then it comes down to, right, now you're talking about impacting force numbers.
Yeah.
Right? So now you're talking about bringing Congress in to approve a change of force numbers. So in that, and like, but you have to dig into it when you start talking about changes like that. And that it's to be the same thing for if we were to take those Green Berets and just make them JTACs. That was their sole career field. That was their sole job, right? Let's say we make them 18 Juliets or whatever, right? Now he's gone to Green Beret school, or he's gone to JTAC school. He's current qualified. All right, hey, your MOS changed. You're no longer an 18 Echo. You're now an 18 Juliet, right? And then that's his career path until he makes E8. You know what I mean? And then now he slides back into special operations teams doing whatever he's got to do to continue moving forward. But again, that turns into like, now I've taken 45 dudes out. I've got to refill those 45 dudes.
Yeah.
Now you're talking to manning change and all those things. And so like, and that's kind of goes back to like the whole JTAC thing in the regular Army. It's not as simple as like, I want to go to JTAC school. You have to have a program. You have to have oversight of that program. You have to have standing evaluation of that program. You have to have certification, accreditation of that program. There has to be availability of schools. There has to be availability of air. There has to be all these things. But also, Congress is now getting involved.
Yeah.
Because now you're allocating budgets. You're allocating funds that are outside of the scope of the duty and position for what that was. Right? It's not as simple as pulling in a couple generals and doing some things. Like, you're talking money and budgets and like joint staff accreditations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there legitimate requirements for you to be a JTAC as a 13 Fox in X position? No. All right. Well, to do that, now you got to go up the bureaucracy chain, big Army joint staff to get the buy off and the sign on.
Yeah.
So, and that's that, and I can nerd out about those things too. And that's one of the things I try and explain to guys. I talk to guys almost all the time. They're like, I really want to do this. What should I do? And I was like, hey man, if you're a young dude, right? So I have E4s, E5s. I'm like, what should I do? I'm like, hey man, go to Ranger Regiment, like go that route, go do that world, experience it, learn it. And then when you're becoming a senior E6, you've made E7, there's only so many jobs in Ranger Regiment for 13 Fox E7s. Hey man, apply to come up to one of the special operations groups. Mm-hmm. Right now you can slide into one of the 4 13 Fox E7 positions. You're already a JTAC. You're already airborne. But you're probably coming over as an instructor, at least an instructor, if not instructor evaluator, mm-hmm. which is huge, right? When you're talking, there's only so many instructors. I mean, like for sure. My unit at one point only had 2 evaluators.
Well, we only had in the Marines like 3 or 4 on the West Coast for a while. There was very few.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
And like if that one evaluator goes red, you're fucked. Like now your request for support, right? And so now you're relying on a whole nother set of standards, right?
And for sure.
Which is ridiculous, right? Like, which is funny, right? Because there's only really one standard.
Yeah.
Right. You go based off of, so like for us, right, it'd be the SOCOM 350-5. That's where the evaluation standard comes from. It's what dictates how the standards operate, right? And then the next echelon below that, USASOC has stuff. Next echelon below that, our 2-star command has an SOP and that sort of stuff. But everything turns back to those papers. But like, dude, you can get an evaluator that's like, hey, that's not how I do things. This is how I'm going to do it. It's like, what the fuck? Like, this dude has not trained to that at all.
Yeah.
Because that's not how our unit trains.
Yeah, unit SOPs. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and it's
so like.
Oh, go ahead.
So like, I mean, I've got an example. We had a JTAC not too long ago that failed an eval, but he was given the scenario, there was counterfire worked into it. And it's like, you expect this Green Beret to understand counterfire? Like, what? And first of all, that's not even realistic, because counterfire would clear air. Like, counterfire would step in and be like, hey man, priority mission, got to do some things. Where your jets currently at? Sure. They're currently here. Hey, we need them to be above this. Here's the gun target line. Let me know when they're clear.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And like, that's not what happened. And it's like, and me as a 13 Fox who understands those things, I'm like, hey, what the fuck? No, that's not how we train. You can't put something in an eval that the dude has never been exposed to.
Yeah.
Or had a chance to learn.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it's an eval's a test. Like, you don't necessarily put things in a test that like weren't on the study guide.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No. And full mission profiles leading up to an eval are basically study guides.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So,
man, that was this was a technical conversation for anyone that made it to the end here. There's probably a handful of JTACs and forward observers still hanging on that are like, oh, okay, probably. I get it. Everybody else is like, what the fuck are they talking about?
They're like we heard some numbers and some .mil PFs and some other things, and no.
yeah, man. Well, I think this is probably a good spot to wrap it up. We're just over 2 hours and stuff. So, and my dog's getting pretty restless over here. Is there anything, any organizations or anything you want to shout out or anything like that? Social media, or anything?
I'll shout out my homie. He owns a shirt company, Time on Target. He's actually one of my JTACs. He owns it with a couple other dudes. Solid dude, solid stuff. And then obviously Home Slice, not a JTAC on Instagram. Is always a good dude.
Okay.
JFO worked with him a couple times. Well, I'm sure you follow him or he's tagged you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, he's got some good memes on there.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, no, yeah. Him and I talk to him all the time, man. There's a lot of Q&As that he'll blast me, be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, for sure. That's funny. It's a small world. Tell him if he ever wants to come on and let me know. I'm always down to have.
For sure. I'm sure that he'll probably fucking text me after he, because I think he listens to your podcast. He texted me after he listened to our first episode. And I've had a couple other dudes text me like, you say things like we're not willing to say. I was like, well, man, the fuck up.
Sack up, bro. Come on and say.
Sack up, bro.
Dude, if people don't know, I mean, there's I'm out, so I can say whatever I want now. So it's like, but a closed mouth never gets fed. You know what I'm saying? If there aren't people, that's
why you sit there and you say my opinion, right? Like my opinion is my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying and that's what I try to explain to guys. It's your opinion, man. But if you don't voice your opinion, as long as you do it tactfully and like explain the problem and then the potential solution, people will listen. You can't just be like, this is all fucked.
The stupidity will continue until someone fucking stops it. Someone's got to step in and be like, wait, what are we doing? That's stupid.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
probably why I'm still getting promoted. So
there you go, man. Well, yeah, for everybody else, or check out my website. It's jkramergraphics.com. @formeractionguys is my Instagram. @jkramergraphics. Both of those. And that's it. Thanks for coming on, man.
Of course, dude. Yeah, it's good. It's always a good one.
Hey, I'll probably...